Chapter 936. The High Lord looked at the group of people who were eyeing him covetously and laughed sinisterly. Do you think you can kill me like this? You already have nowhere to run. Do you still dare to jump off the cliff? This is a bottomless abyss. No matter how high your martial arts are, I don't believe you can survive. Tang Zheng said firmly. Humph, even if I die, I won't fall into your hands. The High Lord was filled with righteous indignation. Then do you dare to jump? Why wouldn't I dare? After the High Lord finished speaking, he turned around and jumped off the cliff. Ah! Everyone cried out in alarm. They were truly frightened by this action. The High Lord actually jumped off the cliff to commit suicide. The High Lord's figure quickly disappeared into the fog below the cliff. Tang Zheng stretched his neck to look at this scene. For a moment, he was at a loss. The others also leaned over the cliff to look. The biting cold wind blew up from the cliff as if it wanted to sweep them down. Everyone retracted their necks and took a few steps back to distance themselves from the cliff. They looked at each other in dismay. He died just like that? Wu Junshan asked blankly. Ever since he knew of the existence of the Azure Dragon Hall, he was extremely afraid of the High Lord. But the person who made him so afraid died so easily. He found it hard to accept. Tian Chanzi said, although the High Lord is very powerful, but after all, there is a limit. Facing so many experts, he had no way to escape. Jumping off the cliff to commit suicide would be a bit more enjoyable. Lan Yu shook his head in disappointment. It's just a pity that I don't know what kind of face is under that mask. Little Zhang said that there was still a jade-faced flying dragon, but I didn't see any trace of him. Wu and Li Xiaotian stared at the cliff. Wu felt relieved, while Li Xiaotian felt a sense of relief. On the other hand, Tang Zheng and Empyrean Fairy were extremely calm. Their gazes intertwined as they looked at each other deeply. Unknowingly, they saw something unusual in each other's eyes. Suddenly, their eyes slightly changed as they said at the same time, something is wrong. Maybe he is not dead. With Tang Zheng's understanding of the High Lord, the High Lord was definitely not someone who was willing to accept his fate. Even if he was in a desperate situation, he would not give up hope and not make a final struggle. This was completely out of line with his character and style. Therefore, the two of them determined that the High Lord was not dead. Hearing their words, the others subconsciously looked at the two of them in confusion. Although the Great Lord's martial arts were powerful, this was still a 10,000 zhang cliff. He did not have wings, nor did he have the ability to fly. How could he not die? Tang Zheng understood everyone's doubts very well. He explained, My lord has been plotting for so long and has been waiting in the dark for an opportunity to take action. If he jumped off the cliff so easily, wouldn't he be too stupid? Then how could he secretly control the martial sect, Li Palace, and Sword Pavilion? This was absolutely illogical. The others thought about it carefully and also realized what was going on. This was indeed the case. Everything was too strange. I'll go down and take a look. Tang Zheng made up his mind. I'll go too. Tian Chanzi and Empyrean Fairy said in unison. Tang Zheng shook his head and said, Tian Chanzi, you go down with me. Fu Yao, you stay with the others, just in case. These people could not fight against the High Lord, and they did not know what dangers were lurking in the dark. Of course, they could not easily leave them here alone. Empyrean Fairy was the strongest, so she was the most reliable person to stay behind and take care of them. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded in agreement. Tang Zheng and Tian Chanzi immediately jumped down from the cliff. However, a light flashed under their feet, and they were already flying on their swords. There were layers of fog in front of them. They were very careful, afraid that there would be unknown dangers in the fog. They safely passed through the fog, and their eyes suddenly opened up. The ground was already in sight, but the towering trees were small. It was obvious how tall they were. He definitely did not fall. Let's pay attention to the cliff and look for him. Tang Zheng analyzed. Tian Chanzi agreed wholeheartedly, and the two began to look for him on the cliff. Their flying speed was very slow, so the two searched very carefully. Not long after, Tang Zheng shouted, Tian Chanzi, there's a cave here. The cave was not small, and it was as tall as a person. Moreover, there were some fresh traces at the entrance of the cave. The rocks had been crushed. He definitely escaped into this cave. I already knew that he had a backup plan so he wouldn't die so easily. Luckily we found him. Otherwise, if we waited for him to escape, it would be difficult for us to find him again. Tang Zheng rejoiced. Let's go in. Tian Chanzi could not wait and rushed in front. His cultivation was higher than Tang Zheng's, so if there was any danger, he would naturally have more defensive power. The entrance of the cave was a little damp, but after a few meters, it was dry. The mountain wind blew in from the entrance, and the air was not turbid. Instead, it was clear. The end of the cave could not be seen, and they did not know where it extended. The two looked at each other and said in a low voice, "Could it be that we can escape from this mountain through this cave? Could it be that this is the Azure Dragon Palace's backup plan?" Tang Zheng did not know. This was something that even Li Xiaotian did not know. In the entire Azure Dragon Palace, perhaps only the High Lord knew. It was no wonder that he deliberately led everyone to the back of the mountain. It was because he had already thought of using this plan to escape. Let's go quickly. Hopefully, we can catch up to him. Tang Zheng said without hesitation, his nerves tense. Okay. Tian Chanzi agreed without hesitation. Then, the two chased after him as fast as lightning. The deeper they went, the darker the cave became. In the end, it was completely dark. The two were not in a hurry to light up the cave. Instead, they groped around in the dark. They did not know where the High Lord was hiding. If they lit up the cave, they would expose themselves and alert the High Lord, making it harder for them to catch him. The two did not make any sound of footsteps at all. Even their breathing was controlled so that it was almost inaudible. They were like ghosts, quietly moving forward. They walked farther and farther, and felt that they seemed to have reached the center of the mountain. This cave actually led to here, which was really surprising. Suddenly, a faint light came from the front, illuminating the cave. The two subconsciously slowed down and looked at each other. They knew that they were very close to their target. Finally, the light became more and more intense. The cave seemed to be lit by fluorescent lights, as if it was daytime. Tang Zheng and Tian Chanzi's pupils shrank. The scene in front of them suddenly became clear. The cave turned into a hall, and there was something erected in the middle of the hall. When Tang Zheng and Tian Chanzi saw this thing, their hearts could not help but beat violently. Their pupils also widened. This was a crystal. Tang Zheng and Tian Chanzi were very familiar with crystal. They had just brought back a large piece from the Swedish royal family. And this crystal was even bigger. They did not know what was hidden in it. At that time, the crystal was left behind by a meteorite falling on the ground. Could it be that this crystal was also left behind? But they did not know why it fell into the hands of the Azure Dragon Palace. The target they were looking for was in front of them. The High Lord was standing in front of the crystal attentively. He looked excited and whispered in a low voice, as if he was whispering to someone. No matter what the situation is, let's catch him first. Tang Zheng decisively made a decision. The High Lord had gone through untold hardships to get to this crystal, and he was rambling like a person on the verge of death. But Tang Zheng had a very bad premonition. The High Lord had gone through so much trouble. There must be a purpose, and it was far from being as simple as it seemed. Tian Chanzi also had the same concerns. Of course, he also had the same countermeasures. He saw that he went straight to the High Lord. The High Lord turned a deaf ear, as if he did not know that there were two enemies standing behind him. Humph, let's see how long you can stay calm. Tian Chanzi stretched out his big hand and grabbed the High Lord. The High Lord cleverly dodged, then slipped behind the crystal and looked at the two with a sneer. Tian Chanzi caught nothing, but he was not discouraged. Facing a master like the High Lord, it was normal to miss in one hit. Tian Chanzi was not discouraged. He shouted, "Let's see how long you can be arrogant." After saying that, he was ready to go over the crystal and capture the High Lord. Just then Tang Zheng shouted, "Be careful." Tian Chanzi's movements suddenly froze, and then he retreated like lightning. When he looked carefully, he was overwhelmed with shock. The huge crystal began to change. It became transparent, but there was no strange creature inside. Instead, there was a person, a woman. The woman was in her 30s. Her hands were closed, and she was dressed in ancient clothing. There was a classical charm between her eyebrows. This scene shocked both Tang Zheng and Heaven Monk quite a bit. Why wasn't there any other unknown creature inside the spar, but a person? The crystal was a foreign object. Could it be that this woman was also from another world? There were people in another world, and they were not all strange creatures. For some reason, when he saw this woman, Tang Zheng's heart was suspended. He had a very bad premonition. The two looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Since the High Lord deliberately came here, could it be that there was something strange about the crystal, or could it be that it could help him? The two were puzzled. Seeing the High Lord's provocative face behind the crystal, Tian Chanzi finally could not bear it and was about to rush over and beat him. But at the critical moment, Tang Zheng pulled him back, because he saw that the crystal was shrinking. Before long, half of it disappeared. Tang Zheng fiercely pulled Tian Chanzi's clothes and reminded him, "This crystal is strange. It keeps shrinking. It is completely different from our crystal." Tian Chanzi also nodded in agreement. This was contrary to common sense, so it was definitely not a good thing. The crystal was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. The crystal was like melting ice, but there was no dripping water, nor was there a dense mist. The powerful energy was completely restrained and gathered in the woman's body. Both of them were stunned. They were very clear about how powerful the energy contained in a crystal was. The energy of such a large crystal was completely integrated into the woman's body. How strong was her body to be able to hold so much energy? Even the sea could not hold hundreds of rivers. Chapter 937. What kind of eyes were those? They were as vast as the stars, making people subconsciously sink into them and unable to extricate themselves. If one's cultivation was weak, they would be directly immersed in them and would not be able to control themselves. Tang Zheng suddenly remembered that the eyes of the unknown creature in the crystal had many similarities with this woman. Could it be that this was a characteristic of the members of that world? He did not know the answer, but he realized that the situation had become troublesome. He reminded, "Tian Chanzi, be careful of her." The Great Lord sneered, "It's too late. Consecrator, kill these two." Consecrator. Tang Zheng was shocked. The Azure Dragon Palace Hall had a total of 3 consecrators. Besides the Elder Angler and the fair-faced Flying Dragon, there was also the most mysterious female consecrator. It was actually this person. Li Xiaotian had only heard of her name, but had never seen her before. As far as she knew, even her master, Granny Li, had never seen her before. No one would have thought that this person was actually in the cliff cave behind the Azure Dragon Palace Hall, and was even sealed in a crystal. Many questions appeared in Tang Zheng's mind. Since this person was a consecrator of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall, could it be that she was not a person from another world? But how could she merge into the crystal and absorb the energy of the crystal in an instant? No one gave him an answer. End of story. The female consecrator's eyes flashed coldly, and she was already attacking the two. "Retreat!" Tian Chanzi suddenly shouted. His senses were sharper than Tang Zheng's, so he had already realized how powerful this person was. Tang Zheng had a telepathic connection, so he turned around and ran, Tian Chanzi bringing up the rear. Whoosh! The two returned to the dark cave one after the other, and ran out of the cave as fast as lightning. The sound of the wind whistling behind them was very clear that the female consecrator was not far behind them. "You go first." Tian Chanzi pushed Tang Zheng and turned around to face the female consecrator. Tang Zheng's heart trembled, and he subconsciously shouted, "Tian Chanzi, be careful." He did not insist on staying. Since this female consecrator was so powerful, he had to let the Empyrean fairy deal with her. Therefore, he tried his best to escape from the cave and flew to the peak of the mountain on his sword. Immediately, he heard a loud rumbling sound behind him. It was obvious that Tian Chanzi was fighting with the female consecrator. "Tian Chanzi, you have to hold on." Tang Zheng prayed silently. He passed through the fog and saw the figure on the mountain peak. He shouted, "Fu Yao, go and save Tian Chanzi." Whoosh! The Empyrean fairy swooped down and flew past Tang Zheng, disappearing into the mist. The others asked in panic, "What's going on down there?" Tang Zheng landed on the mountain peak. Seeing everyone's anxious expression, he hurriedly comforted them, "Don't worry, everything is under control." However, his heart was beating like a drum. That female consecrator was too hard to fathom. He did not know who was stronger between her and the Empyrean fairy. Boom! 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 Loud noises came from below. The fog rolled and the mountain peak trembled. The sound of fighting was very fierce. Suddenly, A few figures rushed out of the fog. The first one was Tian Chanzi. He looked a little embarrassed and had several wounds on his body. Tang Zheng was shocked. Tian Chanzi was already in the first tier of the semi-god realm, but he still looked so embarrassed. It was obvious how terrifying this female consecrator was. However, Tian Chanzi was not seriously injured, which was a blessing in disguise. The Empyrean fairy and the female consecrator rushed out of the fog together. The fog had been completely dispelled, as if it had been cut into pieces by thousands of swords. Seeing the battle between the two of them, the others couldn't help sucking in a cold breath. The two of them were completely floating in the air, and every move they made was extremely fierce. Even though they were very far away, there was a suffocating feeling that made it hard for them to breathe. The Empyrean fairy's magic weapon was a divine weapon, while the female consecrator had a string of bells on the back of her hand. When she shook her arm, the bells wouldn't stop ringing. The sound of the bells seemed to be magical. As soon as the demonic sound entered their ears, they felt their bodies become light, as if their souls were about to leave their bodies. Everyone, be careful of the demonic sound of the bells. Tang Zheng quickly calmed down and reminded them anxiously. Hearing this, everyone's expression changed. They felt like their hearts were swaying, and they almost lost their minds. Immediately, everyone felt the power of the bells. As the bells shook, the crisp sound spread between heaven and earth. Circles of ripples swept toward the Empyrean fairy like waves after waves. The Empyrean fairy looked serious. Since she woke up, this was the first time she faced a threat. Her opponent's bells were also divine weapons. The key was that her opponent's strength was slightly higher than the 100 Faces Star Sovereign. For the time being, the Empyrean fairy couldn't determine a winner. The two sides were in a deadlock. Seeing the two fighting fiercely, Tang Zheng's thoughts ran wild. He glanced down the cliff and happened to see the Lord standing at the entrance of the cave, looking up at the battle in mid-air. Tian Chanzi, let's deal with the Lord, Tang Zheng suggested. Tian Chanzi was also watching the fierce battle without blinking. In his mind, he recalled his thrilling battle just now. He almost died at the hands of the female consecrator, Tang Zheng. He couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. Where did this female consecrator come from? How could she be so powerful? She was also in the divine transformation realm. The strangest thing was that she was also a cultivator. The Azure Dragon Palace had always regarded cultivators as their mortal enemy. Why would they have a cultivator as a consecrator? There were too many contradictions, and he couldn't figure it out. After hearing Tang Zheng's reminder, Tian Chanzi immediately looked at the Lord standing at the entrance of the cave from afar. His killing intent surged. Whoosh! He turned into an afterimage, disappeared, and swooped down at the Lord. The Lord's expression changed when he heard the sound of something breaking through the air and the figure getting bigger and bigger. Tian Chanzi was still in mid-air when he slashed down with his sword. Only this sword was left in the world. The sword light flashed, and the sword chi was thousands of rays. In an instant, it fell at the entrance of the cave. Panic flashed in the Lord's eyes. He didn't dare to fight back, but he didn't retreat into the cave. Instead, he jumped off the cliff. Boom! With a loud noise, the entrance of the cave collapsed and turned into a pile of ruins. It buried the entrance and splashed up smoke and dust. The High Lord fell down quickly. A strong wind blew past his ears, causing his clothes to flutter in the wind. He suddenly raised his head to look, just in time to see Heaven Monk chasing after him like a shadow. The Lord didn't have the ability to fly, so he was at a disadvantage when facing Tian Chanzi. The Lord's toes touched the cliff, and the momentum of his fall was reduced sharply. He finally stabilized his body. He didn't know when, but there was a long sword in his hand. With a shake of the sword, he greeted Tian Chanzi, who was falling from the sky. Tang Zheng and others had only seen him use non-phase method before, but they had never seen him use swordsmanship. At this moment, seeing this swordsmanship, Tang Zheng and Tian Chanzi's pupils shrank at the same time. They were all masters of swordsmanship, so they judged the power of this swordsmanship at a glance. Ding! With a crisp sound, the sword in Tian Chanzi's hand and the sword in the Lord's hand were against each other. The two swords bent back involuntarily and bounced back. Clang! Both of them flew backwards, but Heaven Monk only took a step back before stopping. Then, a sword came from the west. Heaven Flying Immortal. The Lord's sword flashed, and the sword flowers filled the sky. In an instant, they intertwined into a sword light. Kacha! The sword light dissipated, and the heaven-flying immortal broke all of the Lord's swordsmanship. It was extremely simple. Puff! With a flash of blood, the tip of the sword directly pierced the Lord's chest. Blood splashed. The Lord was quick-witted and jumped off the cliff directly, not letting the long sword pierce his chest too much. He was lucky to escape, but his eyes flashed with deep sadness. Once non-phase method was useless. He couldn't do anything to Tian Chanzi. Tian Chanzi didn't let him go. He chased after him, and the two fell off the cliff quickly. Every once in a while, the High Lord would stomp on the walls of the cliff to slow down his fall. In the air, the female consecrator and the mysterious Lady of the Nine Heavens were locked in a fierce battle. When they suddenly saw this scene, they turned pale with fright. They immediately abandoned the mysterious Lady of the Nine Heavens and turned to rush towards the Heaven Monk in an attempt to save the High Lord. Tian Chanzi suddenly felt a cold murderous aura behind him. He was shocked. The magical sound of the bell had poured into his ears. His soul suddenly trembled, and his movements subconsciously slowed down a bit. While he was at a loss of what to do, a shooting sun arrow flew over from afar. The female consecrator's eyes turned and coldly stared at Tang Zhang, who was standing in the distance. Her eyes were cold. Her jade hand quickly reached out, and in a flash, she firmly grabbed the shooting sun arrow. Suddenly, she was pushed forward a few steps by the shooting sun arrow. She quickly stabilized her body and turned around, firmly locking on to Tang Zhang. "Go to hell!" She softly said these two words. With a wave of her hand, the shooting sun arrow flew towards Tang Zhang. Its speed was not inferior to the previous one. Tang Zhang knew the power of the shooting sun arrow and quickly took out the holy armor shield. Clang! With a crisp sound, the shooting sun arrow fiercely hit the holy armor shield. Tang Zhang felt as if he was hit by a high-speed train. He quickly retreated. His arm was numb, and the holy armor shield flew out of his hand. Fortunately, the holy armor shield was a heaven-grade treasure. Although the shooting sun arrow was a sacred tool, it was not used with the heaven-shocking bow, so its power was greatly reduced. Otherwise, the holy armor shield would not be intact. Tang Zhang was well aware of this, so he immediately stabilized his body and picked up the heaven-shocking bow and the shooting sun arrow in mid-air, afraid that his two treasures would fall off the cliff and disappear without a trace. The female consecrator's pupils constricted. She was extremely dissatisfied with the result, but the High Lord was in danger. She could not care less about Tang Zhang, so she abandoned Tang Zhang without hesitation and turned to attack Tian Chanzi, trying to save the High Lord. The High Lord was lucky enough to escape from Tian Chanzi's hands and gasped for breath. Tian Chanzi dodged from afar. Only then did he feel the overwhelming killing intent behind him, causing him to not dare to advance rashly. With this female consecrator, the High Lord had reversed the situation and was almost invincible. The female consecrator stood beside the High Lord and looked at the group of people expressionlessly. Empyrean Fairy and the others also subconsciously stopped their attacks. The short battle had already allowed them to have a rough understanding of each other's strength, and they understood that they would not be able to defeat each other in a short period of time. "Who exactly are you?" Empyrean Fairy was extremely curious about this woman who was on par with her. The female consecrator said expressionlessly, "Azure Dragon Palace's consecrator, Xian Yin." "Why are you helping the Azure Dragon Palace? You are a warrior. Why are you helping the enemy?" Tang Zheng asked first. Chapter 938. Facing Tang Zheng's question, Xian Yin remained indifferent, and coldly replied, "Although I am a cultivator, I am not the same as you." "What do you mean by that?" Tang Zheng was puzzled. "Because I am not a cultivator from this world, I am naturally different from you. Why can't I be your enemy?" Xian Yin said. These words were like a clap of thunder, causing everyone to be dumbstruck. Tang Zheng's head trembled, and he immediately asked, "If you are not a cultivator from this world, then which world are you from?" He had previously guessed that Xian Yin was from another world, but he had later denied it. Now that he heard this answer, all sorts of feelings welled up in his heart. It turned out that he had guessed correctly. Since she was not from this world, it was possible for her to help anyone. However, why did she become a consecrator of the Azure Dragon Palace? Xian Yin swept his gaze across, as if he had seen through Tang Zheng's thoughts, and directly said, "Back then, Nuera was only able to build the Azure Dragon Palace with my help. Do you think there's a problem with me being a consecrator of the Azure Dragon Palace? You helped New Era build the Azure Dragon Palace? This was definitely explosive news. Everyone was shocked and at the same time, they found it inconceivable. But without any doubt, she asked. This was definitely not her bragging. A light flashed across Tang Zheng's eyes as he came to a realization. I understand. I have always been very suspicious about what kind of ability New Era had to be able to expel all the cultivators, but now I finally understand. He did not rely on his own strength. I'm afraid you are the key factor. Xian Yin looked at him with admiration and said, You are really smart. You can actually rely on fragmented information to completely understand the truth. Then why did you do it? Tang Zheng asked angrily. Do you know how cruel this is to our world, and even to those cultivators? The reason why this world became a small world was closely related to the expulsion of cultivators. If there were cultivators, then this world would not have been demoted to a small world, and there would not have been any possibility of destruction. Xian Yin said coldly, This is not my world, why should I be merciful to this world? But what's in it for you? Tang Zheng was unwilling to give up. He would not give up until he got to the bottom of the matter. Xian Yin smiled coldly. Of course it's beneficial to me, but it's even more beneficial to my world. How can you guess the mysteries behind it? Then where exactly are you from? Seeing that the other party was deliberately mystifying, Tang Zheng asked again. The other world, which is what you call the heavens beyond heaven, Xian Yin said proudly. She was obviously very proud of the world she lived in. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. The realm beyond heaven was infamous. No one would have thought that someone from the realm beyond heaven would appear in this world. But now that Xian Yin had admitted it herself, everyone realized that the situation had become very complicated. Tang Zheng was anxious. This meant that the unknown creature was also from the sky beyond heaven. He gradually had a very bad premonition. He muttered to himself irresolutely. You said that doing this would bring great benefits to your world, and you purposely banished the other practitioners to the sky beyond heaven. Could this be your goal? You need those practitioners? Xian Yin was slightly startled. She said in surprise, You're really smart. Although I don't know you, from your performance, you're definitely one of the best of the younger generation in this world. I don't need your praise. Tang Zheng said unhappily. I just want to know your ultimate goal. What will you do to those expelled practitioners? Also, what benefits will this bring to your world? Xian Yin sneered. You want me to answer your questions? Impossible. Tang Zheng flew into a rage. There are so many of us. Do you think you can escape? If you don't tell me the truth, I'll have no choice but to use the soul-searching book. Then all the answers will be easily solved. Humph, the only one here who can threaten me is her. Xian Yin snorted disdainfully. She pointed at the Empyrean fairy and said confidently, But if she wants to stop me, it's impossible. Tang Zheng glanced at the Empyrean fairy. Seeing that she didn't refute this, it meant that Xian Yin was telling the truth. If she wanted to leave, no one here could stop her. A high elder of the Azure Dragon Palace actually turned the situation around. Tang Zheng was very unwilling to accept this. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't gain anything. At least he now knew that the Azure Dragon Palace could do such a shocking thing with the help of Xian Yin from the sky beyond sky. But this was all history. What was more important was Xian Yin's purpose for doing all this. What was this unspeakable purpose? Would it still threaten this world? This was what Tang Zheng was most concerned about. The Empyrean fairy was silent for a while. Then she stepped forward and closed the distance between her and Xian Yin. Her red lips moved slightly. Xian Yin, if you leave alone, I may not be able to do anything. But you're bringing a burden with you. Do you think you have an absolute chance of winning? Of course, this burden was referring to the Great Lord. When the Great Lord heard this, his face under the mask turned red. Even his neck turned red. His eyes were burning with anger, but he was also helpless. With the Empyrean fairy's strength, she was indeed qualified to say this. He couldn't refute it at all. Tang Zheng keenly sensed the Great Lord's embarrassment. He laughed mockingly. Great Lord, you've always been hiding behind the mask and not showing your true face. You're like a rat hiding in the sewers. You can only watch from the shadows and live forever in the dark corners. The Great Lord was ridiculed by the Empyrean fairy. He couldn't refute, But when he heard Tang Zheng's sarcastic words, he was furious. He clenched his fists so tightly that blue veins popped out. He couldn't wait to pounce on Tang Zheng and kill him. Tang Zheng naturally understood his thoughts, so he deliberately said these words to provoke him so that he would lose his mind and take off the mask. He was very curious about the face under the mask. The Great Lord took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. He looked meaningfully at Tang Zheng and said, "You're really a smart person. You actually want to use this kind of method to provoke me. Unfortunately, I've long passed that age. How could I fall for your trick?" Tang Zheng secretly sighed. His plan had failed. The Great Lord was after all the master of the Azure Dragon Hall. He had too many outstanding aspects. This kind of small trick was indeed difficult to use. The Great Lord looked at Tang Zheng and the others with ridicule. "I won't drag down Sir Consecrator. Besides, do you really think that you can defeat my Azure Dragon Hall just by destroying this place? Wishful thinking. If the Azure Dragon Hall was really so easily defeated, then it would have vanished into thin air for hundreds of years." Tang Zheng suddenly said, "It's said that the Azure Dragon Hall has a lot of people, but this time I only saw a few people. Where did the others go?" "Haha, you finally learned to be smart and asked a crucial question. But why should I tell you?" The Great Lord laughed sinisterly. "All the answers will naturally be revealed once I capture you. You don't have that ability." The Great Lord retorted, subconsciously hiding behind Xian Yin. A dignified Great Lord of a generation hiding behind a woman. If news of this got out, wouldn't people laugh their heads off? The Great Lord of course knew that this kind of influence was extremely bad, but in order to save his life, he decided to ignore it. "Kill." Suddenly, a sharp voice came from the Empyrean Fairy's throat. Her figure flashed as she attacked Xian Yin. Ever since the Empyrean Fairy had awakened, this was the first time her killing intent had been aroused. Even when she faced the Hundred Faces Star-Lord, she didn't have such a strong killing intent. That was because she felt a strong sense of danger from Xian Yin's words. This wasn't just for her, but for the entire world. In the face of external aggression, the Empyrean Fairy subconsciously regarded herself as the master of this world. Precisely because of this, she was especially angry at the Azure Dragon Hall who colluded with Xian Yin. She swept a glance at the Great Lord, full of intense killing intent. It was as sharp as a knife, causing the Great Lord to subconsciously avoid her gaze. The Empyrean Fairy's attack was like a thunderbolt, powerful and powerful. The stately painting suddenly expanded like a curtain, covering the sky and covering everyone's heads. It was dark. The only thing that could be seen was the painting. The mountains and lakes on the painting became lifelike and rapidly expanded, as if they were identical to the real thing. A boundless power was emitted from the stately painting. This time, there were no mountains, no torrents, no wind, and no rain, but the feeling it gave off was even more oppressive and terrifying. This power was formless, yet pervasive. Everyone present could feel it. As long as one was under the stately painting that covered the sky, no one could escape. However, the two groups of people felt completely different. Tang Zheng and the others didn't feel too uncomfortable. Although they felt the power of this power, it didn't attack them. Xian Yin and the Great Lord felt completely different. The power attacked them from all directions, from top to bottom, from front to back, from left to right. The look in their eyes changed. This was a killing move, completely incomparable to the previous attack. Xian Yin gritted her teeth and asked, "What kind of power is this?" "The primordial power." The Empyrean Fairy squeezed these 4 words out of her teeth. Her expression was unprecedentedly focused and dignified. The primitive force was a force hidden in the map of mountains and rivers of the gods and Vale. This magic treasure was refined by a supreme master in ancient times. It encompassed the heavens and earth, mountains and rivers, and was almost identical to the real world. However, the root of all this was the primordial power. It was a mysterious power that existed between heaven and earth. Ordinary people couldn't see it at all, let alone extract it and use it as a means of attack. However, the Supreme Master did it. This gave the stately painting great power. However, it was not easy to activate the primordial power in the stately painting. It consumed a lot of power, and it also required the caster's strength. If it wasn't a matter of life and death, she would never use it easily. Just like in the previous dangerous battle, she didn't activate the primordial power. At this moment, she was really angry. She was angry at Xian Yin and the Great Lord, so she didn't hesitate to use this killing move to inflict serious damage on them. Chapter 939. Xian Yin was from the Outland, so she did not know much about the Chaos Force. However, this did not stop her from seeing how powerful this force was. Therefore, Xian Yin and the Lord felt threatened at the same time, and both of them used everything they had. Asterisk ring ring ring. Asterisk. A series of sounds came from the bell in Xian Yin's hand. The bell glowed with a bronze-yellow light and intertwined around her body. Gradually, it formed a huge bell that enveloped her. The sound of the bell became louder and louder. The light became thicker and thicker. It was as if a huge bell was protecting her. The Lord did not have divine powers like Xian Yin. He stabbed the sword in his hand. Rays of sword light intertwined and floated above his head. Asterisk boom boom. Asterisk. The chaos force finally fell. The rocks on the cliff shattered and fell to the ground, turning into dust. The bell formed by the light trembled. The sound of the bell became louder and louder. It was resisting the chaos force. Asterisk crack. Asterisk. The sword light above the Lord's head did not hold on for long. It collapsed like a piece of rotten wood. Asterisk pft. Asterisk. He spat out a mouthful of blood. The rocks under his feet shattered and he fell down the cliff. Seeing this, Xian Yin roared, "Break!" The light of the bell shone brightly and the sound became like thunder. Asterisk crack. Asterisk. A crack appeared on the bell. A beam of yellow light shot into the sky from the opening and collided with the painting of mountains and rivers of the gods of Vale. The mountain-river map shook violently and the chaos force was greatly reduced. The Empyrean fairy's eyes turned cold. She quickly channeled her inner energy. Asterisk pft. Asterisk. Xian Yin spat out a mouthful of blood. Her face turned pale. The crack on the bell grew bigger and the light dimmed. At the same time, the chaos force weakened. The Empyrean fairy felt as if her energy had been sucked out of her body. Most of the vital energy in her body was depleted. She became a little sluggish. Xian Yin took this opportunity to fly down. She grabbed the Lord who was falling at a high speed. Holding the broken bell in one hand, she fell down the cliff. The Empyrean fairy had won this battle. Although she had used up a lot of vital energy, she was not injured. In order to save the High Lord, Xian Yin did not hesitate to forcefully activate her magic treasure. In the end, her magic treasure was damaged and she was injured and vomited blood. When Tang Zhang saw that the Empyrean fairy was on the verge of collapsing, he immediately rushed over to support her. With her soft body in his arms, he didn't have a trace of lust and asked with concern, "How are you?" The Empyrean fairy shook her head and said, "Chase after them quickly. If we let them escape this time, it won't be so easy to find them again." "Tian Chanzi, go after him," Tang Zheng shouted. One should not pursue a cornered enemy. However, this group of people were not cornered enemies, but ferocious tigers. Once the tigers returned to the mountains, there would be no end of trouble. Tian Chanzi dived down the cliff while Tang Zhang helped Empyrean Fairy to the top of the mountain. He handed her over to Wu Junshan and the others and asked them to take good care of her. "You have to be careful too." Seeing that Tang Zhang was about to chase after them, they hurriedly warned him. The scene just now had really taught them a vivid lesson. This was the strength of the strong practitioners. Their fighting strength was indeed extraordinary. They were far from being able to compare with them. In fact, they couldn't even compare with their own son. Wu Junshan and Lan Yu were deeply moved. Looking at the figure chasing down the cliff, the two of them anxiously looked at each other. There were too many inexplicable feelings in their eyes. Tang Zhang and Tian Chanzi flew to the bottom of the cliff one after another. From afar, they saw the figures of Xian Yin and the High Lord. The High Lord did not know how to fly, so he seriously dragged Xian Yin down. He was caught by Xian Yin and fell down awkwardly. "Stop!" Tian Chanzi roared and chopped down with a sword in his hand. From the top to the bottom, the power was terrifying. Xian Yin looked up and happened to see that the sword light was about to fall on her head. Her expression darkened as she shook the broken bell. In an instant, a yellow light soared into the sky from the bell. This yellow light was much weaker than before. Its power was sharply reduced, but it met the sword light head-on. Boom! The two lights collided and exploded. The sky became incomparably gorgeous. The cliff was hit by the light, and rocks flew everywhere. A large part of it collapsed. The two of them were actually evenly matched in this exchange. Everyone was shocked. Xian Yin's face became more and more gloomy. The High Lord couldn't help but twitch his mouth. In an instant, the Empyrean fairy had turned the situation around. The High Lord was flustered and exasperated, but there was nothing he could do. Tian Chanzi and Tang Zheng were overjoyed. They originally thought that Xian Yin was more powerful, but it seemed that they had overestimated her. Her injuries were not light, and her strength had been greatly reduced. Unexpectedly, she was almost on par with Tian Chanzi. Tang Zheng calmed down and said in a low voice, "Tian Chanzi, this is a rare opportunity. Fu Yao is no longer able to fight against her. It's up to us now." Tian Chanzi nodded happily. "You're right. We have to use all our strength to keep them here." After saying that, he increased his speed and was already behind Xian Yin. Xian Yin waved her delicate hand, and the bell flew to her head. It kept shaking, and the demonic sound entered people's ears, causing their minds to sway. Tian Chanzi's face darkened, and he actually stopped. This demonic sound was very different from before. It was indeed powerful, causing people's minds to sway and almost lose their minds. It was precisely this short delay that allowed Xian Yin and Tian Chanzi to pull apart the distance between them. They could see the bottom of the cliff very clearly. The lush forest was dark. If they fell into it, it would be easier for them to hide and escape. Tang Zheng was extremely anxious. He did not care about Tian Chanzi's absent-mindedness, and chased after them. In an instant, he closed the distance between him and Xian Yin. Holding the heaven-shocking bow in his hand, the shooting sun arrow slid past his fingertips and shot towards them with a shocking sound. Insignificant skill. Xian Yin snorted in disdain. Although her strength had temporarily decreased, she still did not put Tang Zheng in her eyes. She did not even bother to use a magic treasure. She pointed her finger in the air, and a vast and mighty power surged out. The shooting sun arrow instantly stopped in mid-air. It was forcibly blocked by this force. But before Xian Yin could be happy, he realized that Tang Zheng's figure was actually right in front of him. This person is really not afraid of death. Since you're courting death, I'll fulfill your wish. The bell shone brightly, releasing a soul-stirring power, and the ringing sound enveloped Tang Zheng. Tang Zheng's eyes became sluggish for a moment, then he regained his senses, and burst out with a burst of shock. He felt that there was something strange in his mind, but after circulating his innate qi, he regained his composure. He finally understood one of the powerful aspects of Xian Yin. She not only attacked the physical body, but also the mind. That bronze-yellow light attacked the physical body, while Ding Ling Ling's demonic sound attacked the mind. The most terrifying thing was that this demonic sound was all-pervasive, making it impossible for people to guard against it. He also finally understood why Tian Chanzi was absent-minded earlier. It turned out that it was the influence of the demonic sound. But why didn't he have much of a reaction? He guessed that it was because he did not have the inner demons. Just as this thought appeared, the voice of the inner demons rang out. "Young man, you're right. This woman's bell can indeed attack a person's mind. But it's too child's play. It can't be compared to mine." Qiyu scoffed and said, "You're pushing yourself to the top. This woman is not simple. Visitors from the sky beyond heaven have never appeared in our time. Perhaps they have discovered our world, so they sent people to explore it, just like how we sent people to explore the sky beyond heaven. Their goal is obviously more aggressive than ours. Otherwise, why would she use tricks to expel all the cultivators to the sky beyond heaven?" The inner demons retorted. "That's natural." Qiyu did not object. "Then do you know what their goal is?" "Do you know?" the inner demons asked. "I don't know for now, but as long as we catch her, we will know." Tang Zheng's heart moved, and he hurriedly asked, "Do you have a way to catch her?" "Of course." Qiyu was full of confidence. The inner demons disdainfully said, "No matter how strong you are, this woman's attack is a mental attack. Your methods may not work." "Who said they're useless?" Qiyu said, unconvinced. "Then let's have a competition and see whose methods are more useful." The inner demons argued. "Let's have a competition. Who's afraid of who? We'll each use our own methods and see whose methods are more effective." Qiyu said angrily, "Tang Zheng, I'll teach you a set of leg techniques. This is my own creation, called the heaven-splitting leg." Humph, what heaven-splitting leg. Such a flashy name. It's definitely not much. The inner demon scoffed, Tang Zheng, I'll teach you a mental attack technique called the mind manipulation technique. Tang Zheng was secretly delighted. As the saying goes, when the sandpiper and the clam fight, the fisherman benefits. Qi Yu and the inner demons did not see eye to eye and fought each other, which benefited him. These two were not ordinary people, and the techniques that leaked out from under their fingernails were not common either. Time is of the essence. Hurry up and tell me what to do. Tang Zheng purposely urged. I'll tell you. Why don't you evaluate who's stronger? In a split second, 2 streaks of light appeared in Tang Zheng's mind, and 2 sets of cultivation techniques immediately appeared in his mind. He was ecstatic. These 2 sets of cultivation techniques were definitely very powerful. Although he had only taken a rough look, he was already shocked by these 2 sets of cultivation techniques. The heaven-splitting leg was a perfect set of leg techniques. It focused on mobilizing the strength of the legs and strengthening the strength of the legs. Tang Zheng had already cultivated the chaotic Vajra spell, and his entire body was as tough as steel, so the heaven-splitting technique was twice the result with half the effort. When his mind moved, an image appeared in his mind, and one move after another automatically evolved. This set of leg techniques was actually a quick method. In just a blink of an eye, he had learned everything. This set of leg techniques was extremely simple, but it was extremely exquisite and overbearing. There were a total of 5 moves, which were sweeping away 1,000 soldiers, stepping on mountains, divine dragon tail, heavenly blade revolution, and splitting the heavens and earth. This set of leg techniques would automatically increase in power as one's cultivation increased, but it also had an extremely high requirement for the cultivator's physical fitness. Not only did it have an extremely high requirement for the toughness of the legs, it also had an extremely high requirement for the control and flexibility of the body. Chapter 940. Tang Zheng immediately shifted his attention to mind manipulation. Mind manipulation focused on mental attacks, which was the same as the demonic sound of the bell, but had many differences. Mind manipulation didn't require the help of an external medium. With a very short incantation and the corresponding mental cultivation method, everything would flow naturally. With a single thought, everything about mind manipulation was deeply imprinted in his mind, and the speed of learning was no less than that of heaven-splitting kick. Tang Zheng had never practiced a mental attack technique, which was very rare in this world. Even the Empyrean Fairy and Tian Chanzi didn't know how to use it. Therefore, compared to heaven-splitting kick, he was more interested in the inner demon's mind manipulation. Seeing that Xian Yin and the High Lord were very close to the treetops at the bottom of the cliff, Tang Zheng grabbed the shooting sun arrows that were colliding with the copper-yellow light and chased after them. At this time, Tian Chanzi also caught up and said indignantly, "This woman is really powerful. She even used a mental attack technique. I almost fell into her trap." Mental attacks hurt people invisibly. Even if it couldn't kill the opponent, it was enough to make the opponent fall into an illusion. It was more difficult to guard against than other physical attacks. "I'll deal with her," Tang Zheng volunteered. Heaven Monk looked at him in disbelief and said, "Can you do it? Tisich, how can a man say no?" Tang Zheng smiled evilly and directly chased after the two. Tian Chanzi looked at him deeply and muttered, "This kid always surprises me. Don't you know that this is a scare? I can't do anything, but you are so confident. Isn't this a blow to me?" Tian Chanzi wanted to cry but had no tears. However, he didn't stand by and watch. Whether Tang Zheng was bragging or not, at least he would join the battle. Whoosh! The air was pierced with a sharp sound. Xian Yin's heart trembled. She looked up and saw 3 shooting sun arrows flying at her at high speed. Xian Yin felt bad. She had consumed a lot of energy. At first, she didn't take the shooting sun arrows seriously. However, the simple exchange just now gave him a new understanding of the power of the shooting sun arrows. The shooting sun arrows were definitely not as simple as she thought. This time, the 3 arrows were fired simultaneously, and the power was even greater. She threw the Great Lord down and said, "You go first, I'll catch up later." The High Lord's speed suddenly increased, and then he steadily landed on the treetops. Without any hesitation, he jumped into the dense forest and disappeared without a trace. "Damn it, the High Lord actually escaped." Tang Zheng cried out in alarm, but he was too far away. He could only watch as the Great Lord disappeared into the woods. Since the High Lord was nowhere to be seen, all the more reason he couldn't let Xianyin go. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to gain much from this trip. His gaze locked onto Xianyin as he leaped towards her. Xianyin took out her little bell, causing it to fly up and float above her head, emitting a bronze-yellow light. 3 copper-yellow rays of light shot out from the bell, and met the 3 shooting sun arrows head-on. A dazzling light burst out in midair. The attack of the shooting sun arrows was neutralized, and the light also disappeared. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Tang Zheng casually put away the shooting sun arrows that were at the end of their flight into his bag, and then stomped down. Step on the mountain. This was one of the moves of the heaven-splitting leg technique. In that instant, Tang Zheng's entire center of gravity sank, and his legs glowed with a golden luster. This was the effect of the chaotic Vajra spell. He suddenly descended. His feet seemed to possess boundless power, enough to crush mountains. Moreover, the momentum of his descent was very compatible with this move, making it even more powerful. Bang! Xianyin did not dodge. Instead, she relied on her slender hands to meet the enemy. She raised her hand above her head, and Tang Zheng's foot just happened to land on her palm. Time and space seemed to have been frozen. In their eyes, there was only each other, and sparks seemed to be flying. Under that attack, a shock wave spread out in all directions from the point where the hands and feet collided. Tang Zheng's momentum was stopped, but he did not stop his attack. Instead, he used the heavenly blade revolution. Whiz! With a sweep of his long leg, it was like a long spear sweeping towards Xianyin's head. A cold light flashed in Xianyin's eyes. She naturally saw the power of this leg technique and reprimanded, "What kind of leg technique is this?" "Heaven-splitting leg," Tang Zheng said indifferently as he increased the strength of his leg to the limit. Xianyin immediately raised her hands to block, grabbing onto one of Tang Zheng's legs, but the huge force caused her to take a step back. "Heaven-splitting leg? That's quite a big name," Xianyin said sternly. Using all the strength in his hands, Tang Zheng's leg that was being grabbed was about to break. Tang Zheng immediately activated the chaotic Vajra spell, and immediately, a golden luster appeared on his legs. Xianyin suddenly used all her strength, but she was still unable to injure her muscles and bones. She exclaimed in surprise, as if she was surprised by the strength of Tang Zheng's defense. Tang Zheng still had some lingering fear, but he would not give her a second chance to use her strength. Although he was very confident in his chaotic Vajra spell, his opponent was an expert of the semi-god realm after all, so he did not dare to take the risk. Thus, with a move that could sweep away 1,000 armies, Tang Zheng's other leg swept towards Xianyin's neck. A gust of wind blew over, and she felt a chill on her neck, causing her expression to change slightly. This set of leg technique seemed simple, but in reality, it had anticipated many situations in actual combat. It seemed ordinary, but in reality, it was ever-changing. There was a saying that no matter how many changes there were, it was still the same. This set of leg techniques was a typical example of this. The simple leg technique included many combinations and changes. A series of attacks made people unable to defend against it. Tang Zheng also gradually understood this point, and couldn't help but look at Qi Yu in a new light. As expected of the leg technique created by Qi Yu, there were many places where Qi Yu's shadow could be seen. This set of leg techniques was particular about being fierce and domineering. It was of the same origin as Qi Yu, and it was also suitable for Tang Zheng's style. Under the sweeping of 1,000 armies, Xianyin had no choice but to let go of Tang Zheng and subconsciously retreat. Tang Zheng escaped, but he did not retreat. His body leaned back, and with a forward somersault, he struck down with one leg towards Xianyin. Divine Dragon Tail Swing. At this moment, his leg was like the tail of a divine dragon, fiercely swinging down with a heart-palpitating power. At the same time, the dragon chi and dragon might in his body automatically mobilized. Pow! The air exploded like a firecracker. The power of this kick was even greater than Tang Zheng had expected. Tang Zheng, the dragon god technique you cultivate is actually very compatible with this divine dragon tail swing, so it automatically mobilized your dragon chi and dragon might. The inner demons was surprised. Qi Yu said proudly, "Now you know how powerful I am. The cultivation technique I created is definitely not a small matter." The inner demons snorted, but did not refute. From his point of view, Qi Yu did not seem to be bragging. Tang Zheng was secretly delighted. He silently circulated the Dragon God technique. The power of this move was not yet exhausted, and it was even more powerful. Xian Yin narrowed her eyes slightly. If she was at her peak, she would not be afraid of these leg techniques. But now that she was seriously injured, it would not be so easy. Moreover, her opponent did not necessarily want to kill her. He only wanted to capture her. Moreover, as long as he could stall for time and wait for the Empyrean fairy to recover, she would have nowhere to run. In fact, Tang Zheng understood this, so he did not want to kill her. That was a fool's dream. Xian Yin gritted her teeth. She had never thought that she would encounter such a defeat. She was forced into such a sorry state by a first-grade Yuanying. Moreover, this set of leg techniques was very strange and powerful. It was not something that someone of his cultivation level should possess. She did not have time to think about it. She hurriedly circulated her energy, causing the bell to emit thousands of rays of light. The sound of the bell became even louder. The demonic sound entered his ears, and there was no sound anywhere else. It was completely poured into Tang Zheng's ears. Xian Yin had already realized that Tang Zheng's mind was firm. Ordinary spiritual attacks would not be effective. Therefore, she accumulated all the demonic sound in order to give him a fatal blow. If it was before, even if Tang Zheng did not have the inner demons, he would still be greatly affected. But now that Tang Zheng had learned the mind manipulation technique, he was able to comprehend spiritual attacks by analogy. As soon as the demonic sound entered his ears, he immediately activated the mind manipulation technique. Since the mind manipulation technique could take the hearts of others, it could naturally avoid such attacks. The inner demons were great at spiritual attacks. Compared to them, Xian Yin was still 10 streets away. Even if the inner demons revealed a little bit of their techniques, it was absolutely not to be underestimated. Xian Yin was originally waiting for Tang Zheng to lose his mind so that she could quickly escape into the woods and disappear. But she saw the corner of Tang Zheng's mouth curl up into a faint smile. Her heart trembled. She cried out in alarm. Bang! The divine dragon swings its tail directly shattered the light on the bell. With a cracking sound, another crack appeared on the bell. Ah! Xian Yin was shocked. The bell was a sacred tool. Its power had been greatly reduced because of the previous crack. This time, a part of it was actually destroyed by the divine dragon swings its tail, forcibly creating a crack. Tang Zheng also did not expect this. The power of the divine dragon swings its tail was much greater than the original because of the effect of the divine dragon arts. Seeing Xian Yin turn pale with fright, Tang Zheng moved his lips and chanted an incantation. At the same time, he activated the mind manipulation technique. An invisible force enveloped Xian Yin. After all, she was an expert in spiritual attacks. She immediately reacted, her eyes releasing a terrifying light. You also know how to use spiritual attacks? Xian Yin's voice became sharp. Previously, she only felt that Tang Zheng was a little extraordinary. But now, she knew that he was the most troublesome person she had ever met. There were very few people in the world who were good at using spiritual attacks. She was only able to cultivate spiritual attacks because of a chance encounter. It was precisely because of this that she was chosen to come to this world with a mission. Spiritual attacks were not only used to attack others, but more importantly, they could also affect others. This was a realm that many other physical attack experts could not reach. When she arrived in a new world and faced an unfamiliar environment, the spiritual attack technique was very useful. Moreover, she also shouldered an even more important mission. Influencing others would be twice the result with half the effort. Nuera was influenced by her, and then attacked the center of Wuxia from the wilderness outside the pass. In the end, she expelled the cultivators and completed her mission. Furthermore, Nuera established a new dynasty. If not for her appearance or bewitchment, none of this would have happened. This world would have entered a new world. Therefore, she was the one who affected this world. Facing the attack of the mind manipulation technique, Xian Yin's mind almost lost control. Although her cultivation was high, in terms of spiritual attacks, she was far from being as high as her own cultivation. Chapter 941. Xian Yin hurriedly activated the bell and enveloped herself in light in an attempt to defend herself against the mind control technique. However, she still failed. She felt as if her mind was in a trance and she was about to lose control. She was very clear about the serious consequences of losing control. It was very likely that Tang Zhang would control her mind and she would become a puppet. This was something that she had done to others before. She did not want it to happen to her even in her dreams. Tang Zhang did not expect the mind control technique to succeed and control her. Thus, he took advantage of the moment when she was distracted to raise his leg. Heaven-splitting earth. This was the most powerful technique in the heaven-splitting leg technique. In an instant, the aura of heaven and earth was stirred up by this attack. Tang Zheng's leg seemed to possess such great power. It broke through the air and rapidly descended. Pang! With a loud bang, Tang Zheng's leg struck the bronze-yellow light. With a crack, the light shattered. However, this attack did not use up all of its strength and still landed on Xian Yin's shoulder. Puh! She spat out a mouthful of blood. Her mind became more and more dispirited and unstable. Tang Zheng's will was like a sword and was about to drill into Xian Yin's mind. Xian Yin's heart trembled. However, she knew that at this critical moment, even if her cultivation level was much higher than Tang Zheng's, if she could not resist, she would become a puppet and would never be able to rise again. She unwillingly widened her eyes and stared at Tang Zheng, not bothering to hide the raging anger in her eyes. Tang Zheng was delighted. He knew that he was about to succeed. This mind control technique was indeed powerful. Of course, if not for the heaven-splitting leg technique, he would not have succeeded so quickly. This set of leg techniques was not inferior to the flying immortal sword technique in close combat. There was no need to rely on magical weapons. It was all based on one's own strength. It had indeed benefited Tang Zheng a lot. Suddenly, his pupils shrank. He looked at Xian Yin in disbelief. This was because a mist rose from Xian Yin's body and enveloped her whole body. Tang Zheng found that his consciousness could not penetrate the mist and the mind control technique had lost its effect. He roared angrily. Was he going to fail at the last minute and let her escape this calamity? He was not willing to give up just like that. Another leg flew up, and a divine dragon swings its tail attack was launched. Bang! A huge repulsive force bounced back from the fog. His leg did not penetrate the fog, and the repulsive force made his leg bones ache. He immediately realized that something was wrong, but it was too late, because the fog quickly condensed and turned into a crystal. She was sealed by the crystal again. Looking at this scene, Tang Zheng was shocked speechless. Except for Tian Chanzi and him, the others had not seen Xian Yin's previous situation, but seeing this change, they were also shocked. Tang Zheng's shock was even more intense, because he knew that Xian Yin had been hiding in the crystal at first, but he didn't expect that she could actually control it as she pleased. Not only did she allow him to escape from the crystal, she could also seal him inside again. Tang Zheng's mind control technique could not penetrate the crystal to attack her, and the energy contained in the crystal was so strong that even a physical attack could not hurt her. Tang Zheng was not willing to give up, and with a flying knife, he kicked the crystal. The crystal fell down quickly, but it was not damaged at all. Tang Zheng sighed and quickly caught up with the crystal. Holding it in his hand, the crystal gradually turned from transparent to blurry. Xian Yin's eyes were filled with unwillingness and anger as she stared at him, leaving a deep impression in his mind. At this moment, Tian Chanzi came out of the forest. Just now, he saw that Tang Zheng had completely taken the initiative, so he directly rushed into the forest to chase after the High Lord. However, the forest was too dense, and this was an unfamiliar environment, so he did not chase after the High Lord and returned empty-handed. He glanced at the crystal in Tang Zheng's hand and said in surprise, "What's going on? Where's Xian Yin?" Tang Zheng pointed at the crystal and said, "She's in there. She sealed herself in there, and we have no way to break it." Tian Chanzi still remembered the strength of the crystal and waved his fist in annoyance. This woman is really cunning. Previously, when he was being chased by Xian Yin in the cave, he was in a very sorry state, which made him suffer a lot. When he saw that Tang Zheng had the upper hand, he thought that he could capture the other party, but he did not expect that she actually had a trick up her sleeve. Now, no one could do anything to her, so they could only stare at the crystal helplessly. Tian Chanzi looked deeply at Tang Zheng and said, "How did you do all this?" Tang Zheng laughed. "A hermit has his own clever plan." Then, he jumped and flew back to the top of the cliff. The others had been watching them without blinking, so they had clearly seen the battle between Tang Zheng and Xian Yin. They had also seen Xian Yin's strange methods, so they all had complicated expressions. This was especially true for the Empyrean fairy, who frowned because she had never seen such a situation before. Is there no way to get her out? The Empyrean fairy asked curiously. Tang Zheng spread his hands. I don't have a way, but you can try. Okay, then I'll try. The Empyrean fairy clenched her fist and threw a punch at the crystal. Boom! A muffled sound rang out. Fortunately, Tang Zheng had firmly held onto the crystal, otherwise it would have been sent flying. The crystal was still intact. The Empyrean fairy's expression dimmed. She was very clear on the strength of her punch. Since it did not cause any damage to the crystal, it was enough to show how powerful it was. Wu Junshan asked with a complicated expression, then is there really no way? He was a martial artist, so he could not think of a better plan, but he could not help but frown when he saw that everyone was in trouble. It's not that there is no way, but it will take a lot of time. It's not something that can be done in a short period of time. Tang Zheng muttered. It's good that there is a way. What is it? Lan Yu was delighted to hear this and asked. Tang Zheng looked at the couple and said, this crystal is a body of energy. As long as we absorb all of its energy, Xian Yin will naturally be able to see the light of day again. Then, we will have a chance to deal with her. The Empyrean fairy and Tian Chanzi did not object, because this was the best way. However, the most important point was that Xian Yin could take the initiative to melt the crystal and escape. If she brought it back to the island like the previous crystal, then it would be a disaster. Once she escaped, the people on the island would become living targets. No one would be her opponent. Tang Zheng had an idea and suggested, why don't I put her into Sumeru Heavens? That way, she won't be able to escape from me. Sumeru Heavens was Tang Zheng's territory. He had the final say. Anyone who entered it would not be able to escape. In addition, he could absorb the crystal's energy at any time and place. Over time, his cultivation would increase greatly. Even if she escaped in the future, he would not have to worry. The Empyrean fairy guessed Tang Zheng's thoughts and nodded in agreement after thinking for a while. This method is feasible, but you must remember that she is very important. She is related to the conspiracy of the realm beyond heaven. Understood. This is the most important thing. Tang Zheng nodded in agreement. The purpose of the other world was definitely not simple. If they did not figure it out, it would be a hidden danger. As for what happened to the cultivators who were expelled, it was also very important to know what happened to them. It was a pity that they did not have anyone from the realm beyond heaven by their side. The demons who returned from the realm beyond heaven had all died in a series of battles. No one could answer this question. Sigh, I should have captured a few demons who returned from the realm beyond heaven. That way, I would have been able to find out what the realm beyond heaven is all about. Tang Zheng sighed regretfully. There is no medicine for regret in this world. Besides, time will give us the answer. The Empyrean fairy did not mind. Tang Zheng smiled. At this moment, Qi Yu and the inner demons were locked in a fierce argument. Both of them wanted to take the credit for themselves. They both said that it was because of him that they were able to capture Xian Yin. They were in a deadlock. Tang Zheng, you be the judge. Qi Yu said angrily. The inner demons also said, that's right, young man. You be the judge. Was it because of my mind manipulation that Xian Yin had no choice but to give up and seal herself in the end? It was clearly my heaven splitter legs' continuous attacks that exhausted her. Even without your mind-absorbing technique, Tang Zheng could have easily captured her. Who needs your help? Qi Yu retorted. Tang Zheng helplessly shouted in his mind. Stop! This time, both of you contributed. It was because of both of you that I was able to capture Xian Yin. Young man, you can't say that. There is always a question of how much credit one has contributed. Who do you think contributed the most? The inner demons did not give up and asked. Qi Yu also said, that's right. Who contributed the most? Say it so that some people will understand their own abilities. Tang Zheng suddenly had an idea. There was no doubt that this time he had gained a big advantage. If it wasn't for Xian Yin, these two would not have been able to use Qi to teach him the heaven-splitting kick and mind manipulation. They must have many other skills or things that would be useful to Tang Zheng. If they were fair and there was no competition between the two, it would not be a good thing for him. This time he had tasted the sweetness of competition, and felt that it was necessary to drive a wedge between the two. If they continued to fight, he might be able to take advantage of them next time. He gradually had a plan in his mind. After thinking for a while, he said, "The heaven-splitting kick was very useful. After all, with my cultivation, I was able to suppress Xian Yin. This is already incredible." Hearing this, Qiyu laughed and said with satisfaction, "Inner demons, are you convinced now? My heaven-splitting kick is even more powerful." The inner demons snorted unhappily. But Tang Zheng did not finish his words and continued to add, "But at the last moment, the mind manipulation played the most important role. If it wasn't for the mind manipulation, with the influence of the other party's demonic bell sound, I would not have been able to gain any advantage. It would have been impossible to force her to seal herself. So in the end, the mind manipulation was more important and more effective." Chapter 942. Qiyu was stunned. He did not expect this to be the result. This was too much of a bully. He was indignant. "Tang Zheng, why is this the result?" Tang Zheng had already anticipated his reaction and calmly said, "I am just speaking the truth." Qiyu was furious, but he could not refute. After all, his heart was still in Tang Zheng's hands. He angrily snorted and said, "Inner demons, don't be so proud." The inner demons laughed. "I am proud, what can you do to me?" Changing the topic, he said to Tang Zheng, "Young man, what you said is the truth, haha. I find that I actually like you a little." "Don't." Tang Zheng refused. "I am not glass." "What is glass?" The inner demons were confused. Qiyu disdainfully said, "You don't even know this, what a country bumpkin. Do you understand the benefits of being gay?" Disgusting. The inner demons was furious. Tang Zheng was too lazy to pay attention to the two's argument, and directly put the crystal into Sumeru world. With a thought, the crystal's energy was continuously absorbed into his body from Sumeru world. This was just like absorbing air. He could absorb the energy of the crystals at any time and place, but he could not absorb too much at once. In other words, one could not become fat in one bite. He enjoyed this process very much. As for Sumeru world, the crystal became transparent, and Xian Yin's eyes were wide open, but there was nothing she could do. Tang Zheng subconsciously looked down the cliff and asked, "Can you really not find the High Lord's whereabouts?" Tian Chanzi shook his head. "This person is very cunning. When I chased after him, I already lost track of him." Tang Zheng was helpless. "All right, although it is a bit regretful, but this time the Azure Dragon Hall suffered a heavy blow, and also captured Xian Yin, so this trip was not in vain." Marshall suddenly interjected, "The Azure Dragon Hall's people are already mostly dead, and this is only a heavy blow?" Tang Zheng guessed what she was thinking and nodded. "The Azure Dragon Hall's strength is not limited to this. We were too optimistic. Although we've gotten rid of Elder Angler and some flying guillotines, their true power hasn't been uprooted yet. Furthermore, the High Lord hasn't been caught yet, so he still has a chance to make a comeback." Wu Junshan and Lan Yu secretly nodded. They agreed with Tang Zheng's point of view. They had been in the martial organization for most of their lives, so they could clearly deduce the general strength of the Azure Dragon Palace. The strength of the Azure Dragon Palace was definitely not limited to this. Otherwise, how could it lead the martial organization, the Li Palace, and the Sword Pavilion? Moreover, they had only killed a few flying guillotines this time. The remnants of the Li Palace, the Sword Pavilion, and the martial sect had not appeared, so the strength of these people could not be underestimated. "I already know the whereabouts of Li Palace and Sword Pavilion." Tang Zheng glanced at Li Xiaotian, who had not said a word since the beginning. This information was dug out from her mind. Since the High Lord has escaped, then let's make a trip to these two places, Tang Zheng said. Wu Junshan and Lan Yu's eyes lit up as they cheerfully applauded. They were relatively familiar with the Li Palace, but they were very curious about the Sword Pavilion. This was because the Sword God was powerful and his actions were secretive, so the martial organization did not have much contact with him. The others naturally did not have any objections and walked down the mountain. Seeing Li Xiaotian remain silent, Tang Zheng asked with concern, "Are you all right?" Li Xiaotian took a deep breath and raised her head. She squeezed out a smile, but it was very bitter. "I'm fine." Tang Zheng nodded and said, "Don't think about the past. Put your thoughts on the future. People can't choose the past, but they can choose the future." Li Xiaotian's eyes lit up and she nodded. I understand. Thank you. Tang Zhang did not try to persuade her any further. The group quickly descended the mountain and headed towards their next destination. The sword pavilion was located on a dangerous peak. The precipitous cliffs were like a sword piercing the heavens. The sword pavilion had a total of 300 sword slaves, and the core of the sword pavilion was the sword hut. It was said that the sword god had comprehended sword techniques in the sword furnace and finally reached great success. The sword pavilion was rarely visited by people. The highest peak in a chain of undulating mountain peaks was called the Divine Sword Peak. The steep and bumpy mountain forest seemed to have become flat ground under their feet. They were many times faster than ordinary people. They were unimpeded and arrived at the undulating mountain peaks outside the sword pavilion. Suddenly, the Empyrean fairy raised her hand and everyone subconsciously stopped. There's an ambush, the Empyrean fairy said in a deep voice. Tang Zheng's pupils constricted. The sword slaves of the sword pavilion should not be so close to the outside. They should be closer to the inside. However, the Empyrean fairy would never make a mistake, so he warned, "Everyone, be careful. Li Xiaotian, stay behind me. I will protect you." Li Xiaotian had powerful martial arts, but she didn't know how to use them. Therefore, Tang Zhang had no choice but to protect her. After this journey, Li Xiaotian's mood had stabilized, and he obediently followed behind Tang Zheng. Go! They took a few steps forward. Suddenly, whoosh! Whoosh! Streaks of sword light seemed to emerge from the ground as they strangled the group of people. The Empyrean fairy was walking at the front, but she was indifferent. These sword lights could not hurt her at all. Just as they were about to get close to her, an invisible force vibrated from her body, and the sword lights shattered. At the same time, Tian Chanzi also acted. The long sword in his hand trembled, and sword lights scattered all over the sky, accurately intercepting those sword lights. In an instant, all of the attacks collapsed, as if they had never appeared. This scene shocked the sword slaves hiding in the dark, and their breathing involuntarily quickened. Tian Chanzi's gaze turned, and he immediately locked onto the position of the sword slaves, and lightly slashed out with his sword. The sword chi was like a rainbow. The sword slaves were stunned. They had only seen this kind of powerful sword technique from their master, the sword god. Who were these people and why were they so powerful? But there was no time to think, and they subconsciously raised their swords to block. Crack! The long sword broke. They could only watch as the sword chi entered their foreheads. A line of blood bloomed, and their vitality was cut off as they fell to the ground, dead. Tang Zhang knit his brows as he looked at the sword slaves, and doubtfully said, "The sword slaves shouldn't be placed in such an outer area. They seem to have expanded the defensive circle." He had learned from Li Xiaotian's brain that the sword pavilion's defensive formation was very different from what he saw now. It seems like Song Yu did something, and changed the sword pavilion's defensive formation. Marshall's anger towards Song Yu had never decreased. Back then in the Imperial City, everyone had almost died in the explosion that he had detonated. This enmity was deep in his bones, and he would never forget it. Thus, Marshall angrily said, "He definitely knows that we are not dead, so he is guarding against our revenge." Tang Zheng laughed in disdain. "So what if he is guarding against it? These defenses will not change the outcome." Tian Chanzi urged, "Then let's hurry up and destroy the sword pavilion, then we can go to the Li Palace." The few of them continued forward, and not long after, they met the second group of sword slaves. However, this time, the number of sword slaves and their resistance were clearly stronger. It was precisely because of this that they believed that their actions had been exposed, so they immediately rushed towards the steep divine sword peak as fast as lightning. The few of them quickly cut through the chaos, and without any obstruction, they arrived at the foot of the divine sword peak. Everyone soared into the air, and with the tip of their feet on the cliff, they did not take the normal path, and directly rushed towards the top of the divine sword peak. Tang Zhang held onto Li Xiaotian's hand. She was extremely nervous, and her palms were covered in sweat. Whiz! A sword flew over from the top of the mountain, and directly shot towards Tang Zheng. With a thought, there was no need for him to make a move. The War Soul sword appeared out of thin air, and welcomed the sword. Clang! A spark flickered, and the sword broke into two, but the War Soul sword was still intact. Everyone had already flown halfway up the mountain, and were about to reach the top of the divine sword peak. Suddenly, The sound of something tearing through the air rang out, and 36 sword beams flew over from the top of the mountain, surrounding everyone. This is a sword formation, everyone be careful. Tian Chanzi immediately saw through the profoundness of the formation, and reminded everyone. Everyone braced themselves as the 36 swords were about to arrive. The 36 swords seemed to have eyes, and automatically split into several parts, each attacking their opponent, but at the same time responding to each other. Tang Zheng was shocked. This sword formation was not simple. As expected of the sword pavilion, they had their own unique understanding of the way of the sword, and they also understood the essence of it. Without a doubt, the existing warriors in the sword pavilion were unable to control their swords from a distance, but they could use the sword formation to achieve a similar effect. But looking at the 36 swords that were moving freely, Tang Zheng remained calm and composed. Seeing a few swords flying over, he waved his War Soul sword, and with a clang sparks flew, all of them slashing onto the swords. However, he felt a huge rebound force being transmitted from the War Soul sword to his palm. Furthermore, with one strike, the War Soul sword was not able to break the seemingly ordinary sword. The sword formation gave these seemingly ordinary swords different characteristics. Humph, you want to stop us with just a mere method? Tang Zheng growled. The War Soul sword shone brightly, the sacred artifact's power completely erupted, and a sword flew out. Shwa! A lightning-like sword light shot out from the War Soul sword, directly slashing towards one of the swords. The person controlling the sword seemed to have sensed the danger and hurriedly retreated. However, it was already too late. Tang Zheng's aura had firmly locked onto the sword. Crack! With a crisp sound, the sword light directly split the sword into two. The sword formation was damaged, and its power was greatly reduced. Some of the swords seemed to be drunk as they started to sway. The others were all experts, so how could they miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Thus, they took the opportunity to counterattack. With the sound of battle, the sword formation was broken. The 36 swords broke one after another, and all of the attacks disappeared into nothingness. Everyone smiled knowingly. The tip of their feet tapped on the cliff, and then they soared into the air, steadily landing on the top of the divine sword peak. The sword furnace immediately appeared in front of everyone. The sword furnace was not big. It was like a straw hut, extremely simple and crude. However, in the eyes of an expert, this sword furnace was not simple at all. Every blade of grass and every tree contained the way of the sword. No wonder the sword god was comprehending sword techniques in the sword furnace. This place was indeed unique. Just by looking at it, it firmly attracted everyone's attention. However, their attention was immediately attracted by another matter. Chapter 943. In front of the sword furnace, a figure stood proudly like a desolate ancient sword. His two sword-like eyebrows were raised high, filled with sword intent. Qisha! This person was the sword god's disciple. He had fought with Tang Zheng and the others in the Changbai Mountains. Tang Zheng's expression was slightly cold as he stared at him. Compared to before, Qi Sha's aura was completely different. His cultivation had clearly improved by a lot. He still remembered Qi Sha's rising sun sword technique, so he did not underestimate him. However, with so many experts around him, he did not fear him. Tang Zheng, it really is you. Qi Sha's tone was filled with boundless killing intent. You killed my master. This time, I will make you pay with your blood. Qi Sha, are you the only one? Where is Song Yu? Isn't he the one in charge of the sword pavilion? Tang Zheng asked curiously. 7 kills said coldly, cut the crap. You'll have to get past me first. Alright, then I will test your skills. Tang Zheng took a large step forward but was beaten to it by Marshall. Let me. Marshall said, Sword God's disciple, if you miss this opportunity, you won't have it again. The meaning of these words was very thought-provoking. The Sword God's bloodline would no longer exist from today onwards. Therefore, she rushed to fight with Qi Sha. To her, Qi Sha was a very good opponent to train her martial arts. Ever since she started cultivating the fire underworld divine palm, her cultivation had greatly increased. Now she had reached the limit of a Xiantian martial artist, 9th grade Xiantian. She was only a step away from the great scholar realm. This kind of cultivation speed was simply unimaginable to her in the past. She had once fantasized that if she reached the great scholar realm in her 30s, she would already be considered very powerful. But now, she was only in her 20s and was actually about to reach the great scholar realm. She was even more powerful than her master and master's wife. She was very clear on who the greatest credit should belong to. Qi Sha understood the deep meaning of Wu's words. His anger burned more and more. He said, "Wu, you are in cahoots with these cultivators. I will take your life first and offer it to my master's spirit in heaven." Shwa! He shook the long sword in his hand and performed the rising sun sword technique. The light at the tip of the long sword was as bright as the sun. It slowly rose from the sword, as if a red sun had risen from the sea. Marshall crossed his palms, one cold and one hot, the two attributes alternating in the center of his palms. Now, she had a deeper understanding of the Netherfire Divine Palm, and she understood more about the extraordinariness of this cultivation technique. When she first started cultivating the Inferno Divine Palm, it was very domineering, very similar to the roaring flame saber that she used to cultivate. But later on, she gradually realized that when things reached an extreme, they would move in the opposite direction. When the inner strength that was like a red flame was cultivated to the extreme, it actually gave birth to an extremely cold inner strength. Fire gives birth to cold, and when things reach an extreme, they will reverse themselves. This made her feel the profoundness of this palm technique. It was precisely because of this transformation that her power had advanced by leaps and bounds, and her body had reached a miraculous state of harmony between yin and yang. At this moment, when she used this set of palm techniques, her palms alternated between hot and cold. In the end, her left hand was cold, and her right hand was hot. If it was anyone else, they would have been tormented long ago, but she would not. 2 waves of inner strength silently circulated within her body. 7 Kills could also see that this set of palm techniques was extraordinary. He still roared and thrusted his sword forward. The sun-like sword light suddenly exploded, transforming into small sword chi. Like a shotgun, countless sword chi shot towards Marshall like marbles. Marshall did not say a word, both of his palms fiercely pushed forward. A vast and mighty palm wind that alternated between cold and hot swept forward, like a huge wave that could topple mountains and overturn the seas. Bang, bang, bang. A series of explosions rang out as the palm wind and the sword chi collided. The two of them tapped their toes and rushed towards each other at the same time. In an instant, in front of the sword furnace, the two of them were like graceful butterflies, rising and falling as they fought. Although Marshall did not have a weapon, his hands did not lose to a weapon, especially the Netherfire Divine Palm. Cold and hot alternated, blazing and cold palm wind swept towards the opponent. The killing power was astonishing. Bang! A tree was struck by the palm and broke into 2. Ice gradually formed on the broken part, and even in the summer, it still emitted cold air. 7 Kills just happened to see this scene. His pupils constricted, his heart trembled, and he immediately slashed down with his sword. Puff! The sword chi was blazing. His sunrise sword art was also a very masculine sword art, so even the surging sword chi showed a masculine chi, which made people feel as if they were burning flames. The air shook and was slashed to the sides by the sword chi. Then, a rainbow pierced through the sun and the sharp sword pierced straight through, directly reaching the top of Marshall's head. Marshall growled. Both of his hands rose into the air, clamping down on the sword. The surging sword chi immediately tried to harm her hands, but his palms released 2 waves of inner strength, one cold and one hot, resisting the sword chi. Moreover, the sword underwent a drastic change. One side seemed to be burned by flames, turning fiery red, while the other side seemed to be covered in ice, turning snow white. In addition, the cold and hot energy spread upwards, and soon, it reached the sword hilt. The entire sword body turned red on one side and white on the other, presenting a strange scene. 7 Kills' eyes widened as he looked at this scene in disbelief. He roared unwillingly, urging his inner strength to resist. However, crack! With a crisp sound, the sword broke inch by inch, turning into fragments that scattered on the ground. Seeing his sword destroyed, 7 Kills was heartbroken and furious, but there was nothing he could do. With a thought, Wu Xan pushed both of his palms forward. Pung pung, 2 palms struck Qi Sha's chest at the same time. Whiz! 7 Kills flew backwards into the sword furnace, leaving behind a long trail of blood in the air. Marshall took advantage of the opportunity to pursue and enter the sword furnace in a flash. This sword furnace was very simple and crude. It was a small pavilion made of straw, surrounded by simple wooden walls. 7 kills broke the wooden door and entered the pitch-black sword furnace, while Marshall chased after him and disappeared into the darkness. Suddenly, Tang Zheng became alert and shouted, "Don't chase after him." In a flash he chased after him, but just as he reached the door, a figure flew out. His gaze turned cold as he hurriedly caught it. It was Marshall that had fallen into his embrace. Marshall gasped for breath, his face pale, and said, "There's danger in the sword furnace." Seeing that she was fine, Tang Zheng heaved a sigh of relief and comforted her. "You step back first, I'll take care of him." Marshall was a little angry. His strength was clearly higher than 7 kills, but after entering the sword furnace, he somehow suffered a blow and was actually kicked out in a sorry state. "Be careful." Marshall clenched his teeth and warned. Tang Zheng nodded his head lightly and walked into the sword furnace with large strides. When he crossed the threshold, a wave of hot air assaulted his face. Taking a closer look, he actually found a huge furnace in the middle of the sword furnace. It was filled with bubbling hot molten iron, and beside it were swords that had not been forged yet. They were bright red and emitting hot steam. 7 kills stood in front of the furnace, staring straight at Tang Zheng. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. His expression was dispirited, but his brows were extremely ferocious. "Tang Zheng, you killed my master. I am not skilled enough, so I have no way of taking revenge for my master, but I will not admit defeat." 7 kills said in a powerful voice. Tang Zheng coldly snorted and asked, "7 kills, you are inverting black and white. If it wasn't for the sword god coming to kill me, how could he have died in our hands? Are we going to stretch out our necks and wait for death?" 7 kills was speechless. After a long while he said, "I don't care. In any case, master died in your hands." Tang Zheng shook his head. He did not want to argue with him and said, "I only want to ask you one question. Where are the other people from Sword Pavilion? Where is Song Yu?" There were a total of several hundred sword slaves in Sword Pavilion, but they had met too few sword slaves along the way. Furthermore, they did not see any other sword slaves on the Divine Sword Peak, so he was very curious. 7 kills said sinisterly, "Song Yu is the same as you, ambitious and cowardly. When he heard that you were attacking, he actually abandoned Sword Pavilion and escaped with his people. If Master knew in the underworld, he would definitely be ashamed and regret passing down Sword Pavilion to him." 7 kills was angry and unwilling, but also heartbroken. Furthermore, there were 2 handprints on his chest, one red and one white, one fire and one cold, making him look even more desolate. "Escaped." Tang Zheng raised his eyebrows. This Song Yu was truly cunning. His ability to run away could be considered first class. Back in the capital, he had also escaped when the situation was bad. Now that he had heard the fighting outside, he did not hesitate to escape with a group of sword slaves. Those cowards deserve to die. They listened to Song Yu's bewitchment and have already betrayed Sword Pavilion. They are not worthy of being Sword Pavilion's people. 7 kills angrily accused. Tang Zheng secretly nodded. After all, Song Yu was a member of a large family. He was eloquent and had many methods to bewitch people. Of course, he was not someone who only knew martial arts like 7 kills could compare to. In the Sword Pavilion, although Qi Sha's seniority was higher than Song Yu's, he couldn't compare to Song Yu in terms of small tricks. This result was not out of Tang Zheng's expectations. However, the cooked duck had flown away, which made Tang Zheng very unhappy. He asked, "Where did they escape to?" "Don't say that I don't know. Even if I knew, I would definitely not tell you." 7 kills said sinisterly. Tang Zheng inwardly shook his head. He knew that he would not be able to dig out any useful information from him. 7 kills. You were clearly not Marshall's match just now, but you forced her back and even injured her. You haven't used up all your tricks yet, right? This time, I will personally witness your skills because you will not have this chance in the future. Tang Zheng had the confidence to say these words. 7 kills did not refute him, but his eyes kept changing. In the end, he firmly locked onto Tang Zheng. He became resolute and said, "I will die with you." Boom! With a loud sound, he overturned the furnace beside him. Fiery red molten iron spurted out from the furnace and splashed in all directions. The sword furnace immediately caught on fire. At the same time, 7 Kills grabbed an unfinished long sword from the furnace. The long sword was fiery red and sizzling sounds came from his palm. There was a burnt smell coming from it. However, he did not feel anything. Instead, his face was completely red as he pounced towards Tang Zheng. The fiery red long sword in his hand lit up. The light was boundless, as if it really was a blazing sun, releasing all of its light and heat. Chapter 944. Tang Zheng subconsciously soared into the air, dodging the magma like molten iron on the ground. A wave of heat rushed over as the 7 assassins stabbed over with their fiery red swords. The blood-like fiery red sword light stung people's eyes. Tang Zheng squinted his eyes, and the war soul sword also released a dazzling light. Clang! The two swords clashed and sparks flew everywhere. A few sparks landed on Tang Zheng's clothes and immediately ignited. Tang Zheng immediately circulated his energy to extinguish the flames. The war soul sword in his hand danced, and a sword light scattered down, blocking all the flames outside his body. 7 Kills bared his teeth as he looked at Tang Zheng. He knew very well that he was burning his life force, but so what? He was going to die together with him. The reason why his fighting strength could increase by so much in an instant was all because of the rising sun sword technique that he cultivated. This sword technique was extremely masculine and unyielding. After forcefully enduring the pain and holding onto a fiery red sword, all of his energy and inner strength were channeled into the sword. Instead, he and this unfinished sword had reached the realm of becoming one with the sword, perfectly displaying the power of the rising sun sword technique. Clang! Another sword strike. The war soul sword was undamaged, but a gap appeared on the other sword. Tang Zheng laughed coldly. How could an unfinished sword be compared to the war soul sword? 7 Kills was also very clear about the situation. Looking at the broken sword in his hand, he gritted his teeth and cut open his other palm. Blood seeped out from his palm and dripped onto the broken sword. The blood and the broken sword merged into one, and the broken sword emitted waves of scarlet light. Tang Zheng's pupils constricted. He knew that 7 Kills was making his last gamble, so he took the initiative to attack. 7 Kills quickly retreated, retreating again and again. Fresh blood completely fused into the broken sword as if it was free. The broken sword's light shone brightly, instantly enveloping him. Bang! 7 Kills retreated to the front of the furnace and stepped on the molten iron. However, he did not notice that the molten iron had corroded his shoes and feet, revealing his white bones. He only stared straight at Tang Zheng, and the corner of his mouth revealed a trace of a smile. It was incomparably sinister, causing one's heart to turn cold. Tang Zheng, do you think that I am courting death by leading you into the sword furnace? Haha, you're too naive. I said that I'll take you down with me. That's why I'm confident, 7 Kills laughed maniacally. I don't see how you can take me down with you, Tang Zheng retorted. Really? Then do you think this sword furnace is really a broken thatched hut? 7 Kills pointed around and asked jokingly. Tang Zheng's heart skipped a beat. He looked around. This sword furnace contained sword intent. This was the place where the sword god used to comprehend sword techniques, so it was not surprising that it contained sword intent. It seems like you have seen through some clues, but without my guidance, you definitely wouldn't have known. The name Divine Sword Peak is not a random name. The sword intent in the sword furnace is naturally emitted. Back then, Master saw through this point, which is why he chose to comprehend the sword again, build the sword furnace, and forge the treasured sword because... He purposely stopped and looked at Tang Zheng with a meaningful gaze. Because what? Tang Zheng asked curiously, and his interest was indeed piqued by 7 Kills. Because, there is indeed a divine sword hidden in the divine sword peak, but the divine sword is formless, only the sword intent, and the essence of the sword intent is all gathered in this sword furnace. Other than Master, only senior brother Jian Shisan and I know this secret. Song Yu, that cowardly fellow, does not know. This sword intent is the foundation of why the sword pavilion is called the sword pavilion. 7 Kills said with pride. Tang Zheng subconsciously looked towards the ground, where he stepped on a small piece of empty land that was not covered by molten iron. He could clearly feel this sword intent. However, the sword intent was too scattered, as if it had become one with a mountain peak. What use could it have? Master once wanted to forge a peerless divine sword, and had already thought of a way to absorb this sword intent from the divine sword peak. Unfortunately, He did not manage to wait for this day. What master has not done, I will do for you. As soon as he finished speaking, the broken sword in his hand fiercely stabbed into the ground. Puff! The broken sword pierced into the rocks on the ground, all the way to the hilt. In that instant, the aura within the sword furnace changed drastically. All of the scattered sword intent quickly condensed and fused into the broken sword. Tang Zheng's pupils constricted as he shouted, "Oh no!" and hurriedly slashed out with his sword, aiming for Qi Sha's head with a heavy force. If he was hit, 7 kills would probably be cut into 2 halves. 7 kills revealed a sinister smile and said, "It's already too late." Bang! The War Soul sword slashed through the air, but was blocked by an invisible force. Tang Zheng was shocked. He understood that this was the work of the sword intent. Ha ha ha, I understand now. The momentum is unstoppable. Tang Zheng, prepare to die. 7 kills laughed wildly, holding the sword hilt with both hands he roared, "Rise!" Ka ka ka. The broken sword rubbed against the rocks, making a strange sound. In the end, the broken sword was completely pulled out. The fiery red sword looked as if it was forged from blood. The divine sword has been formed. Quickly die. The broken sword roared and raised both of its hands. Its entire body seemed to be on fire. Its eyes turned fiery red and its clothes emitted bursts of green smoke. As one with the sword, he bathed in the sword light. It was incomparably resplendent and slowly rose into the sky, as if it was really a rising sun. Tang Zheng was an expert in the way of the sword, so when he saw this scene, he immediately understood the power behind it. He hurriedly activated his cultivation, causing his innate qi to surge. The War Soul sword was good at absorbing yin qi, so it emitted a cold yin qi that enveloped Tang Zheng. Kill! 7 kills roared and turned into a ray of sword light. As one with the sword, he slashed towards Tang Zheng. Tang Zheng's eyes were bright and full of expression. Holding the sword with both hands, he watched as the fiery red sword light got closer and closer. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind and he subconsciously brandished the War Soul sword. The War Soul sword drew a beautiful arc. It seemed slow and gentle, but it accurately caught the broken sword. Clang! A wave of sword chi surged out, but neither of them retreated. Instead, they clenched their teeth. Tang Zheng was surprised to recall that his previous strike was not the heaven-flying immortal sword technique, but the second move of the Taiji 2-form sword technique. Back then, he had learned a total of 2 moves, but he immediately forgot about them. He did not expect that the second move would appear on its own, causing him to subconsciously use it. The 2 swords were in a deadlock, but Tang Zheng's mind flashed with a flash of inspiration. He actually learned the third move in a split second. Previously, he had always wanted to learn the third move, but he had never succeeded. He did not expect that he would actually succeed this time. He really could not understand this sword technique. But now was not the time to think about this. He had just learned it, and before he forgot it, he immediately used it. The War Soul sword swung to the left, as if there was a huge force pulling the broken sword to the left, and then to the right, drawing a large circle. A surge of energy immediately emerged from the circle. From the inside to the outside, from the bottom to the top like a fountain, it soared into the sky. Boom! With a loud sound, the energy collided with the broken sword. The 2 swords were knocked away, and the 2 people flew backwards. Kacha! The gap on the broken sword grew bigger and bigger, like a spider web rapidly spreading out. In an instant, it covered the entire sword body, and then collapsed, turning into pieces that scattered on the ground. The light on 7 kills disappeared as well. His entire body seemed to have been sucked dry of blood. He was extremely thin, his body was like firewood, and his eye sockets were deep. He was like a completely different person from before. Tang Zheng was also shocked by this scene. The power of the broken sword was actually so great, and the backlash to its owner was so terrifying. Impossible, how could this be? 7 kills looked at the pieces on the ground in a daze, as well as the monstrous sword chi released from the broken sword. He danced around, as if he wanted to gather the sword chi. However, how could the formless sword chi gather towards him? It was all futile. But he was like a madman, running around the room. Not long after, his body was set on fire, but he did not know. Tang Zheng secretly shook his head. This person had gone crazy. However, when he recalled the third move, he could not help but be deeply shocked by its power. But he was also dismayed to find that the third move had mysteriously disappeared from his mind, and he had no impression of how to use it at all. Sigh. He faintly sighed. This Taiji two-form sword technique was too strange. For a moment, he could not figure it out. Wang Wang. Suddenly, the war spirit sword trembled without any warning, and the sword spirit's voice sounded in his mind. Master, quickly absorb these sword chi. Otherwise, they will be wasted after they spread out. Tang Zheng was overjoyed. He had actually neglected these precious sword chi. They were already ownerless, so how could he waste them? He immediately activated his power, causing the war spirit sword to shine brightly, and with a so sound, it flew into the air. Waves of sword chi seemed to have found their loved ones, and quickly gathered in the air. Whoosh whoosh. The war spirit sword continued to absorb, and the light became more and more intense, dazzling the eyes. Tang Zheng was secretly delighted. The war spirit sword had a sword spirit, and was indeed extraordinary. Otherwise, without the sword spirit's reminder, he would have forgotten about this. With the sword spirit absorbing the sword intent on its own, he turned his attention to 7 kills and discovered that he had already fallen to the ground. His body was burning with flames, emitting crackling sounds, and was on the verge of death. Tang Zheng shook his head and said, "You also hate Song Yu for betraying Sword Pavilion. I will get him to see you as soon as possible, so that you two can reunite." I can't accept this. I will kill you." 7 Kill's throat still emitted intermittent sounds. His killing intent still did not weaken. Tang Zheng shook his head and said, "If the sword god was here to absorb the sword intent of the divine sword peak, then what he forged would be a peerless divine sword, and what you forged at the last minute is only a poor quality one, which is why you were defeated by my war spirit sword." Chapter 945. Hearing Tang Zheng's analysis, 7 Kills roared unwillingly, but his voice suddenly stopped. His head heavily hit the ground, and then there was no more sound. 7 killed. Tang Zheng shook his head, and then placed his attention on the War Soul Sword above his head. The War Soul Sword had already absorbed all the sword intent in the sword furnace, and the light suddenly converged, and then instantly exploded. A glaring sword light lit up, and Tang Zheng subconsciously closed his eyes. When he opened them, he discovered that there was an additional person in front of him. No, this was not a real person, because there was no trace of life. It was as if it was formed from interweaving light and shadow. This person's face had a vaguely familiar outline. When Tang Zheng moved his head, he immediately recognized it and exclaimed, "War Soul!" This person was actually a miniature version of the War Soul. Back then, the War Soul was just a Yin soul, ferocious and terrifying, with a huge body. Now that he had returned to the size of a normal person, Tang Zheng was actually unable to recognize him. Ever since the War Soul Sword absorbed the Sword Soul and fused with the Sword Soul, the War Soul had never appeared again. Tang Zheng thought that it would never appear again, but he never thought that it would appear again. "Master, I am the Sword Soul," the other party said methodically. "Sword One Soul." Tang Zheng was stunned. "You can actually leave the War Soul Sword?" The Sword Soul nodded. "Yes, I merged with the original War Soul and became like this. It's just that my appearance is the original War Soul." Tang Zheng suddenly realized that the Sword Soul was the War Soul. There was no difference. He was overjoyed and subconsciously extended his hand, wanting to touch the other party, but discovered that his hand had directly passed through the Sword Soul's body. He was shocked and hurriedly asked what was going on. The Sword Soul was not surprised and said, "Master, after I absorbed those sword intents, I used them to condense them. However, I am not a real entity. I am just a strand of sword intent." Tang Zheng patted his head. So that was how it was, but even so, the shock it gave him could be imagined. "Then what can you do?" Tang Zheng calmed down and asked curiously. The sword spirit thought for a while, then gently tapped the ground with his finger. The War Soul Sword that was floating in the air did not move at all, but the rocky ground immediately cracked open, as if it was split open by a sword. Hiss! Tang Zheng sucked in a breath of cold air. The power of the sword spirit was indeed extraordinary, and it could attack autonomously. In other words, when he fought with others in the future, the sword spirit could leave the battle soul sword and catch the enemy off guard. "Master, as long as you think about it,
I can attack the enemy without the help of the War Soul Sword's main body.
The sword spirit added. Tang Zheng nodded happily and praised loudly. Good, good, good. Tang Zheng, what do you think of my gift to you? Qi Yu's voice rang out.
Back then in the sky pit in the northeast, it was with his help that the War Soul Sword was able to fuse with the Sword Soul. Otherwise, with Tang Zheng's strength, how could he have succeeded in something that even the Sword God could not do? Tang Zheng understood this very well, so he was not stingy with his praise for Qi Yu.
This gift is very good. I like it very much. Thank you. Haha, inner demons, did you hear that? How can your mind-assimilating technique be compared to the sword spirit? The sword spirit will be of great use to Tang Zheng in the future. Qi Yu proudly showed off.
The inner demons coldly snorted and retorted, My mind-assimilating technique is stronger than your sword spirit.
Hee, you're a stubborn duck.
Tang Zheng, let me tell you, as the quality of the War Soul Sword increases, the sword spirit will also evolve. In the end, it can even evolve into a physical body.
You should be very clear about what this means.
Qi Yu said as if he was asking for credit.
Tang Zheng was in full bloom.
Of course he understood what this meant. If the sword spirit really evolved into a physical body, then it would be like a sword expert. This kind of expert was condensed from sword intent, and he could not imagine how high his achievements would be in the future. A person's every word and action, even a frown, was a sword intent.
If he wanted to kill someone, he didn't even need to attack.
The air could be condensed into a sharp sword by him and take his head.
He stared at the sword spirit without blinking. It was hard to imagine what kind of scene it would be when that day came.
However, there was no doubt that the sword spirit was under his control.
Qi Yu, thank you.
He sincerely thanked him.
Haha, you're welcome. This way, you'll know that I'm really good to you. I'm not like some people who only talk about it but don't practice it.
It's just a little bit of profit, yet they dare to brag all day long.
Qi Yu did not let go of this opportunity to attack the inner demons. The inner demons was silent.
He sulked and did not say a word.
Tang Zheng secretly rejoiced. Inner demons, you better find a big benefit for me and then counterattack Qi Yu. This way, you can get back at me. However, my benefits are great. Master, I'm still weak for the time being. I can't stay outside for too long. I want to return to the War Spirit Sword. The Sword Spirit said.
Tang Zheng happily nodded his head. Then hurry up and go in.
Don't hurt yourself. With a flash of light, the Sword Spirit disappeared. It turned into thousands of sword intents and merged into the War Spirit Sword. The War Spirit Sword automatically flew back into Tang Zheng's hands. The Sword Spirit's voice sounded in his mind. Master, the War Spirit Sword's power has increased greatly. The power of your heaven-flying immortal sword technique will also increase by a lot. Hearing this, Tang Zheng secretly nodded his head. He held the sword hilt and with a thought, he used the heaven-flying immortal sword technique. In an instant, a dazzling sword light broke through the air. Boom! With a loud bang, the sword furnace exploded.
It was already in a dilapidated state, and after being burned by the fire, it was as if it had been hit by a cannonball.
It exploded from the inside, and debris flew in all directions, filling the sky. Empyrean Fairy and the rest had been staring at the sword furnace the entire time, especially Wu. Just now, Tang Zheng had saved her and rushed into the sword furnace for her. When she heard the sounds of fighting coming from inside, her heart was in her throat. She really wanted to rush in and help Tang Zheng, but was stopped by Empyrean Fairy. Empyrean Fairy said that this was a rare opportunity for Tang Zheng to deal with it himself, and that there would definitely be no danger. Tian Chanzi also said the same thing. Although Wu was extremely worried, he could only stare at the sword furnace. Lan Yu held her husband's hand tightly with one hand and covered her chest with the other, feeling the intense heartbeat coming from her chest. She was the same as Wu, but after hearing the words of Empyrean Fairy and Tian Chanzi, she endured it. Moreover, she believed in the words of the two, and she believed in Tang Zheng's strength even more. Seeing the sword furnace ignite with raging flames and the terrifying sword intent that blotted out the sky and covered the earth being released, Lan Yu and Wu almost couldn't help but rush over. The strength of this sword intent caused Tian Chanzi's eyebrows to twitch a few times. He smacked his lips a few times and sighed. The world is big, there are all sorts of strange things. So that's how it is.
I was wondering why this mountain was so strange, so it actually contained such a powerful sword intent. But he still did not move, and Empyrean Fairy was even calmer, so the others did not dare to act rashly. In the end, with a loud explosion, the sword furnace turned into ruins and flew in all directions. Empyrean Fairy stood at the very front. With a wave of her small hand, a gust of wind blew out. The ruins were completely blocked outside, unable to harm them in the slightest. Tang Zheng felt his eyes light up, and everything suddenly became clear. The mountain breeze blew past his face, and seeing everyone looking at him with a burning gaze, he could not help but smile and say, "I'm fine." Wu Fei threw himself into his embrace and said with lingering fear, "It's good that you're fine." Tang Zheng ignored everyone's strange gazes and felt her concern and love from the bottom of her heart. He lovingly caressed her hair and said, "I'm fine, don't worry, how could 7 kills hurt me?" Wu Chue said angrily, "It's all because I'm useless. I've practiced the Fire Nether Divine Palm for so long, but I still can't beat 7 kills. Tang Zheng shook his head and explained, "No, you've already defeated him. It's just that he used the method of burning his life force, and the sword furnace was filled with boundless sword intent. In that instant, his fighting strength had already risen to the Grandmaster realm, so of course you're not his match." Wu thought for a while, then revealed a knowing smile. "That's good." Cough. Wu Junshan coughed dryly, interrupting their kiss. Wu Junshan's face turned red, and she quickly left his embrace. Lan Yu glared at her husband with hidden bitterness, as if she was complaining about how he had disturbed their good fortune. Wu Junshan helplessly rolled his eyes. Empyrean Fairy did not care about the subtle relationship between the few of them. She stared straight at the War Soul sword in his hand and asked, "Your War Soul sword has undergone a change. What exactly happened?" Tang Zheng smiled faintly. He did not hide anything and told her everything that had happened in the sword furnace. Everyone was dumbstruck when they heard this. Their hearts trembled in fear, especially Wu. He subconsciously tightened his grip on Tang Zheng's hand, unwilling to let go. This time, it was a rare time for her and Tang Zheng to be alone, so she actually cherished this period of time. Moreover, everyone already knew about her relationship with Tang Zheng, so why hide it? She was not the kind of girl who was shy, so she might as well be magnanimous. She did not want to take advantage of Li Xiaotian, who was always by Tang Zheng's side. She subconsciously looked at Li Xiaotian and discovered that she was staring at Tang Zheng with shining eyes. It was as if his words had a huge attraction that made her unwilling to move her gaze away. Wu's heart skipped a beat, and he subconsciously grabbed onto Tang Zheng's hand. Suddenly, he had a subtle feeling. Could it be? She hurriedly shook her head. No, although she had changed her appearance and become a new person, she definitely could not have any intimate relationship with Tang Zheng. She had to take on the responsibility of supervising him. The others' attention was attracted by everything that had happened in the sword furnace. They were unable to calm down for a long time, especially Tian Chanzi. He looked at the War Soul sword and said, "So you're saying that your War Soul sword has evolved, and the sword spirit can already leave the War Soul sword's body?" This was something he had never heard of before. Even the most powerful divine sword he had ever seen did not have such an ability. Tang Zheng nodded. Tian Chanzi sighed in his heart. This was truly the Yangtze River's waves behind the waves. He was afraid that before long, the waves in front of him would be smacked onto the beach. Chapter 946. The Empyrean Fairy lightly said, "Tang Zheng, the sword soul can leave the battle soul sword body. This is already a 1 in 10,000 chance, but if you want to obtain the physical body you speak of, this is a very long road. In any case, according to what I know, the number of people in this world who can do this can be counted on one hand." Tang Zheng's enthusiasm was not extinguished. He still happily said, "Even so, I have already taken the first step. In the future it is only a matter of time." Seeing him so confident, the Empyrean Fairy did not say anything more. Moreover, this was indeed a good thing. Lan Yu was more excited than the others, his eyes shining as he looked at his son and praised, "I believe you can do it." Wu Junshan also looked at Tang Zheng with gratification. On the way here, he once again personally felt that Tang Zheng was not ordinary. This feeling was even more profound than the last time he was in the island nation. "Thank you." Tang Zheng politely nodded towards them. Although he felt a little unfamiliar, it was still much better than before.
making Lan Yu and Wu Junshan very happy. Li Xiaotian realized that other than herself, the others were all concerned about Tang Zheng. Her bright eyes could not help but dim as she gradually lowered her head. No one knew what she was thinking. Since Song Yu and the other sword slaves have already escaped, what do we do now? Tian Chanzi asked. Sigh. Tang Zheng muttered to himself for a moment, then said, Sword Pavilion no longer exists, even though Song Yu is not dead, but since he has escaped, we will definitely not be able to find him in a short period of time, so there is no need to waste time on him. Let's follow the established itinerary and head to Li Palace. Li Palace had already taken root in a new place. This was the information that Li Xiaotian read in her mind. Since Sword Pavilion no longer existed, Li Palace naturally could not let it go. They had to quickly cut the Gordian knot and take advantage of this momentum to exhaust the strength of the Azure Dragon Hall and the other large organizations. Li Xiaotian already knew that she was from the Li Palace, so when she heard that they were going to attack the Li Palace, her heart couldn't help but tighten. Her expression became panicked, but she quickly regained her composure. She secretly warned herself that since she had decided to sever all ties with the past, this trip to the Li Palace was necessary. In fact, she could only be considered to have truly severed all ties with her former self after this trip. Tang Zheng noticed something wrong with Li Xiaotian and asked, Are you okay? Li Xiaotian shook her head and said, I'm fine. She paused for a moment and said hesitantly, Tang Zheng, I have a presumptuous request. What is it? Just tell me. If I can do it, I will definitely not refuse. Hearing this, everyone looked at her curiously. With regards to Li Xiaotian, everyone's feelings towards her were rather complicated. However, in general they had already forgiven her. They didn't know that she would make such a presumptuous request. Wu's heart tightened as she stared straight at Li Xiaotian, afraid that she would say something that would make her worried. You said before that I originally knew martial arts, but I lost my memories, so I even forgot my martial arts. Then, can you think of a way to help me recover my martial arts? Li Xiaotian looked at Tang Zheng expectantly, afraid that he would refuse or say that he was powerless. Tang Zheng was silent, because he didn't know if he could do it. This was a situation that he had never encountered before. Seeing Tang Zheng's reaction, Li Xiaotian's eyes dimmed, the corner of her mouth revealed a bitter smile, and said, If there's no other way, then forget it. This is just a fool's dream. This is the punishment given to me by the heavens, and I am willing to accept it. Don't worry. Seeing her so pessimistic, Tang Zheng hurriedly comforted her. I didn't say that there's absolutely no way, it's just that this is the first time I've encountered such a thing, so I can't think of a good idea right now. But since your martial arts are still in your body, then there must be a way to reactivate it. Tang Zheng recalled the scene of the car accident when she saved the little girl. He could confirm that her martial arts were still there, but she needed a trigger condition. Li Xiaotian's heart was once again ignited with the flames of hope, and said, Really? That's great. In any case, we still have a long way to go to the Li Palace. On the way, I will think about it carefully and find a way. Tang Zheng said truthfully. Li Xiaotian jumped up in excitement, and couldn't help but throw herself into his embrace. In an instant, the divine sword peak became completely silent, leaving only the whistling of the wind. Tang Zheng's expression stiffened. He never thought that Li Xiaotian's reaction would be so big. He almost didn't have time to react before he felt a warm and soft body being stuffed into his embrace. He could even clearly feel the soul-stirring elasticity of her chest. Wu originally held onto Tang Zheng's hand, and when he saw Li Xiaotian throw herself into his embrace, his eyes widened. The thing he was most worried about had happened. She actually took the initiative to throw herself into his embrace. This was too shameless. Wu Junshan and Lan Yu looked at each other, as if they didn't expect such a thing to happen. The enemy throwing herself into one's embrace was something that only happened in movies. How could it happen in reality, and it even happened to their son? This was truly a headache. Tian Chanzi, on the other hand, had an indifferent expression. He looked at Tang Zheng with a smile that wasn't a smile. Empyrean Fairy was indifferent, as if all of this had nothing to do with her. Tang Zheng wasn't in the mood to enjoy this beauty's grace, moreover. He also felt strange in his heart. After all, he and Li Xiaotian had been opposing each other for so long, and he wasn't a beast. As long as a woman threw herself into his arms, he would like it, so he pushed her out of his embrace and said calmly, When I find a way, I will naturally help you.
Li Xiaotian nodded his head continuously, the smile on his face becoming more and more brilliant. Let's go. Tang Zheng turned around and left, holding on to Wu's hand. He had seen Wu's reaction just now, so of course he could not provoke her at this time. Otherwise, he would not be able to walk in the end, and he did not want his backyard to be on fire because of Li Xiaotian. Sure enough, seeing him tightly holding on to her hand, Wu's expression became much better. She meaningfully glanced at Li Xiaotian, then obediently accompanied Tang Zheng down the mountain peak. The two of them took the lead and walked at the front, leaving the others a distance behind. Li Xiaotian fiercely twisted his arm and complained, "She threw herself into your arms just now. Are you very happy?" Tang Zheng couldn't help but laugh. The usually carefree Wu was actually jealous. Women's bones were indeed not much different. "You're still laughing. You must be secretly happy, right?" Wu said bitterly. Tang Zheng retracted his smile and hurriedly explained, "You are wronging me. I saw that you were beautiful, so I smiled at you. I didn't smile because of Li Xiaotian's hug." Wu heaved a sigh of relief in his heart, and his face immediately revealed it. Although her martial arts were strong, in terms of meticulousness and shrewdness, she could not compare to Yi Dingdang. If Yi Dingdang were to encounter such a situation, even if he was very happy in his heart, he would definitely keep a straight face on the surface. Seeing her reaction, Tang Zheng felt relieved. Taking advantage of the fact that no one was around, he turned his head and kissed her. The two of them were about the same height, so he did not need to bend down. He only needed to turn his head to kiss her cheek. Immediately, 2 red clouds flew up on her face. She was extremely shy. On the battlefield, she was a decisive expert. But in front of love, she was still no different from an ordinary girl. She raised her fist, as if massaging it, and hit Tang Zheng's body. She said coquettishly, "You are too bad. Everyone else is watching." Tang Zheng chuckled. "They are still behind. How can they see? Moreover, even if they see, they will pretend not to see. They will definitely understand the principle of not looking." Flowery words. Sophistry. Wu glared at him and said, "You don't want me to say it? Then I'll go tell the person behind me." Tang Zheng rolled his eyes and said with a mischievous smile, "You dare." Wu immediately widened his eyes and glared at him like a tiger eyeing its prey. Tang Zheng laughed out loud and quickly kissed her again. This time, he kissed her lips, causing her entire body to tremble. She could not help but lean against him tightly, her entire body going soft. Tang Zheng directly hugged her waist. She struggled a few times, but was unable to escape from his clutches, so she let him do whatever he wanted. Although she was shy in her heart, she enjoyed it very much. Occasionally, she would glance back and see that the others were still far away. She could not help but heave a sigh of relief. At least they did not see her embarrassed state. The road down the mountain was not long, and the two of them enjoyed a rare intimate time. By the time they reached the foot of the mountain, Wu's face was already red and he was panting. If it wasn't for the fact that this place was not suitable, the two of them would have already fought for 300 rounds. Wu did not want the others to catch up and discover his embarrassing state, so he immediately pulled away from Tang Zheng and circulated his energy to calm his surging emotions. His cheeks and breathing slowly returned to normal. The others finally caught up. Although they discovered that the two of them had normal expressions, as if nothing had happened, they knew that something must have happened between the two of them. They deliberately pretended not to know and did not point it out. However, Lan Yu looked at Wu with eyes full of praise and encouragement. He thought to himself that it was not a waste of his daily guidance. This girl had finally become enlightened. There were too many women in the family, and it was impossible to spread the rain and dew evenly. This was a rare time to be alone, and if he was still hesitant, it would be snatched away by others, such as Li Xiaotian. She subconsciously looked at Li Xiaotian, but found that his expression was normal, as if nothing had happened. Her heart was moved. Li Xiaotian had always been known for his intelligence and cunning. Although she had lost her memories, this kind of nature still existed. In terms of scheming, he would probably surpass Wu. She immediately felt a sense of danger. She had to keep a good relationship between her son and Wu. She could not really let Li Xiaotian snatch her son away. Moreover, the Holy Maiden of Li Palace had also cultivated charm techniques. In terms of dealing with men, she was even more formidable. Many women could not compare to her. Chapter 947. The chirping of birds and the fragrance of flowers, untainted by the mortal world. The scene in front of them was such a scenery, making one feel relaxed and happy. But the more beautiful something was, the more dangerous it was. Tang Zheng firmly believed in this point, so his mind became vigilant. Moreover, after his last visit to the Li Palace, he was even more afraid of the methods of the Li Palace. At this very moment, they stood in front of the new Li Palace. Just like the previous Li Palace, it was magnificent and enchanting. Perhaps this had to do with the fact that the Li Palace was filled with women who liked these flowers and plants. Li Xiaotian stared blankly at this scene. She had no impression of this. Although she felt that it was beautiful, she subconsciously felt a sense of danger. She subconsciously warned, "This place is very dangerous. Everyone must be careful." Hearing her say this, the others dared not underestimate them. After all, this was the Li Palace, where Wuxia's intelligence network was the most advanced. Moreover, the Li Palace's palace master, Granny Li, was the most sinister and cunning. Her territory was not a place that an ordinary person could set foot in. This was still a mountain valley. On both sides of the valley were layers upon layers of mountains, but they were like two slender and elegant women guarding the entrance to the valley. With Li Xiaotian's experience, Tang Zheng walked along a special winding path with great familiarity. The others cautiously followed behind him. Scent Sigma. There's an array set up in this mountain valley. If an ignorant person were to recklessly charge in, they would fall into the array. As Tang Zheng walked, he explained. He couldn't help but recall those bathing women he had met in the Li Palace. That was an illusion created by the fragrance of the flowers on the mountain that confused one's mind. This time, they were familiar with the path and no similar situation occurred. When they passed through the long entrance to the valley and arrived at its center, the scene before them was even more beautiful and moving. It was like a paradise. Tang Zheng thought that the Li Palace was truly formidable. It was actually able to find such a beautiful place in the middle of these rolling mountains. If this place was developed into a tourist attraction, the people of the country would probably flock to it like a flock of ducks. He shook his head, casting aside these random thoughts and focusing his attention on the front. There were no lofty palaces here, only small bridges and flowing water. In the distance, there were many wooden houses. It was like a village, with a few scattered women walking through them. Suddenly, an ear-piercing voice soared into the sky. Tang Zheng cried out in alarm. Just as expected, although they had successfully passed through the valley, the moment they appeared in the middle of the valley, they were still discovered by the vigilant Li Palace disciples. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. A series of whistling sounds came from afar, and a group of people rushed in front of them in the blink of an eye, blocking their way. Suddenly, a cry of surprise rang out from the crowd. Everyone looked at Li Xiaotian in surprise and subconsciously shouted, "Saintess, why are you back? You're not dead?" The disciples of the Li Palace had also been misled by the news sent back by Song Yu, mistakenly believing that Li Xiaotian had already died in the battle for the imperial city. They had never expected that he would once again stand in front of them, alive and well. Their faces immediately lit up with joy as they welcomed her warmly and cheered, "Saintess, everyone thought you had died. If the palace master knew you were still alive, he would definitely be very happy." Looking at these familiar faces, Li Xiaotian didn't know how to respond. He stood there in a daze, not knowing what to do. "Wait a moment." An ear-piercing voice rang out from the crowd. A woman stepped forward and pointed at Tang Zheng's group, asking, "Why are they here? These people are all enemies, and there are even men." The Li Palace had a rule that forbade men from setting foot in. If a man did, there was only one outcome: death. Moreover, although these people had never personally seen Tang Zheng's group, they were still intelligence collectors, so they had seen their pictures and recognized them at a glance. These were enemies, so why had they appeared in the Li Palace? And why had they appeared together with the Saintess? They immediately sensed something strange. "Saintess, just what is going on?" They subconsciously took a step back and warily asked. On the way here, Li Xiaotian had already learned a great deal about her relationship with the Li Palace, and she also understood that she was the Li Palace's Saintess. When she heard the crowd's questions, she was at a loss at first, her mind in a mess, but for some reason, she was quick-witted and quickly calmed down. As if this place had triggered a nerve in her, the panic in her eyes disappeared in a flash, replaced by an unrestrained sharpness. Without being angry, she took a large step forward, eyeing the crowd like a tiger eyeing its prey. Seeing her overbearing gaze, the crowd subconsciously averted their gazes, not meeting her gaze. After all, her usual dignity was still there, deeply imprinted in their bones. Tang Zhang had originally believed that he had been exposed, so a fight was unavoidable. Now that he saw Li Xiaotian's reaction, he actually had the misconception that the decisive and ruthless saintess of the Li Palace had returned. But he was not in a hurry to make a move, and instead quietly observed the situation. The others also curiously looked at Li Xiaotian. On the way here, because of Wu and Tang Zhang, Li Xiaotian had become much quieter. Although she would occasionally raise a few questions about herself and the Li Palace, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Li Xiaotian swept her sharp gaze across the crowd and said, "My matters, when did you have the right to question them?" This voice was not loud, but it was filled with an unquestionable dignity, causing everyone to be subconsciously startled. This tone was exactly the same as the previous Li Xiaotian's. The Li Palace disciples lowered their heads. Normally, Li Xiaotian had this kind of attitude in the Li Palace. She was the high and mighty saintess, the chosen candidate for the next generation's palace master. Other than the palace master, everyone else had to listen to her orders, and no one had ever dared to question her actions. Tang Zhang and the others were even more surprised than the Li Palace disciples. This was because Li Xiaotian's change was too great, as if she was a completely different person. It made people wonder if she had really lost her memories. However, this thought only flashed through their minds. This was because they were certain that Li Xiaotian had really lost her memories. All of this was an act, but the act was too perfect, no different from the real thing. This was the amazing part. Lan Yu's eyes flickered as he sighed in his heart. Although Li Xiaotian had lost her memories, many of her body's intrinsic qualities had not been lost, such as this quick-wittedness. If it was anyone else, perhaps they would have already panicked and revealed their true colors. But Li Xiaotian calmed down in an instant. She could simply take the crown of Best Actress. Li Xiaotian is really too smart and cunning. Although her nature is not bad, if she occasionally has a little thought, others would not be able to detect it. They are simply not her opponent. It may not be a good thing to keep this kind of person by my son's side. Lan Yu had this preconceived idea. The more he watched Li Xiaotian's perfect performance, the more he felt it was unreliable. Li Xiaotian looked at the crowd with a fierce aura and asked, "Where is the palace master?" "The palace master has already left for some time." Li Xiaotian frowned. "Where did she go?" "Holy maiden, did the palace master leave before you left and still not return?" "Only you know where she went." Li Xiaotian was shocked. How could she remember where the palace master went? But she still did not reveal it. She nodded slightly and said, "Then I know." "Holy maiden, these people are enemies. Why did you bring them to the Li Palace?" If the palace master knew, she would definitely fly into a rage. Someone cautiously glanced at Tang Zhang and the others, wanting to say something but hesitating. In the end, he could not hold back and asked. Li Xiaotian coldly smiled and mysteriously said, "This is the palace master's arrangement." If you can also comprehend the profound meaning within, then wouldn't you all become the palace master? Everyone hurriedly lowered their heads and said with fear and trepidation, "This subordinate does not dare to question the palace master's decision. Since it is the palace master's order, then we will carry it out." Tang Zhang sighed in his heart. Li Xiaotian had really given him a big surprise. Turning hostility into friendship, there was no need to use swords against each other. These ordinary disciples of the Li Palace did not pose too much of a threat to him. His main enemy was Granny Li. As long as she died, the others would be scattered soldiers and disbanded like a sheet of loose sand. Seeing that he had shocked these people, Li Xiaotian's lips curled into a faint smile. He lightly nodded and ordered, "Quickly prepare a room. I want to entertain these guests." "Yes." Someone hurriedly left. Tang Zhang and the others looked at her in astonishment. They did not know why she had stayed behind. Since Granny Li was no longer in the Li Palace, then they should go find her. But in front of so many disciples of the Li Palace, they could not refute her decision. Otherwise they would definitely be exposed.
Everyone looked at each other in dismay. In the end, they decided to wait and see. They followed her to the center of the Li Palace. In the village with a small bridge and flowing water, there were many houses built in picturesque disorder. Along the way, there were many people secretly sizing up this group of people. The Li Palace was filled with women. Besides the women who were outside collecting information, many of the women had never left the Li Palace in their entire lives. They had never seen the outside world, and had never even seen a stranger. They lived every day in this palm-sized place. So after dispelling their hostility, many people were very curious about this stranger who had come for the first time. Once everyone had been properly settled and the others had been dismissed, the cold and harsh expression on Li Xiaotian's face disappeared. He smiled and said, "I'm sorry. I did not ask for everyone's opinion before making this decision." Everyone was silent. They stared at him without blinking. Li Xiaotian was somewhat alarmed. He hurriedly said, "If it's not appropriate, we will leave now." Tang Zhang broke the silence and asked, "Tell us your reason. Why should we stay?" Li Xiaotian breathed a sigh of relief and confidently said, "At that time, they said that the Li Palace Empress had already left and that no one knew where she went. Moreover, it seemed that only I knew. I thought that perhaps if we stayed, we could track her whereabouts. This would be more advantageous to us. Otherwise, finding a needle in a haystack would be too difficult." Hearing this, everyone's eyes brightened. At that critical juncture, he was able to think of so many things. His meticulousness was truly not something an ordinary person could compare to. Seeing that no one had any opinion, Li Xiaotian said, "I acted on my own accord. I hope that everyone will not take offense. In the future, I will definitely discuss this matter with all of you." At this moment, he was like a completely different person from before. It made people wonder if he was the same person. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.